Good afternoon, Conference. Welcome to F30, which you'll find on page 78 of the standard printed agenda, or under page 23 of the Conference Extra if you're using the app. There are no amendments, so can I please remind all speakers to keep to time? I now ask Sam Al-Hamdani to stand by and Helen Morgan to speak, to propose the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. It's just over a year since the disastrous mini-budget of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And given his job to try to clear up the mess that they'd made, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, warned that decisions of eye-watering difficulty would need to be made as a result. And one of the decisions that he made was to retain a scheme costing £120 million over the next decade, whose only impact would be to deny hundreds of thousands of people their right to vote. Personation at a voting station is incredibly rare. In May 22, there were 7 accusations, all of which were dropped by the police. In 2019, at the general election, there was 1 conviction. By anyone's standards, this problem is not worth £120 million of our money. During the debate this year, Rishi Sunak described the ability to vote in elections as a privilege. He is totally wrong. Voting in an election is our right, and it's one that has been hard fought for. The Electoral Commission found that in May's local elections, 4% of those who didn't vote said that was because of voter ID. Now, the Electoral Commission also said they would expect the proportion to be higher in a general election. Now, if 5% of people stayed away because they lacked the correct ID, that would be 800,000 people not voting in a general election. And it won't surprise you to know that those who are turned away are disproportionately from disadvantaged groups. Among those with a significant disability, 9% didn't vote because they lacked ID. That figure is 8% among the unemployed, and young people, or those from a minority ethnic background, are 5 times more likely to be turned away from the polling station because they have an unacceptable form of ID. The Electoral Commission warned the government, told them to delay the rollout so that plans could be better thought through, and that plea was ignored. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was in the cabinet when this law was introduced, famously described the scheme as an attempt to gerrymander the election. Now, Conference, I hate to be the one to quote Liz Truss, but that is a disgrace. I'm proud to report that Liberal Democrat MPs and peers have opposed this every step of the way. We've dragged ministers to this dispatch box with urgent questions to explain themselves. I've tabled the legislation to stop this fiasco, and in the Lords, we could have killed it off altogether with a fatal motion tabled by our own brilliant Kath Pinnock. But unfortunately, Labour didn't support us. So Jeremy Hunt was right when he said that to fix the mess the Conservatives have made of our country, decisions of eye-watering difficulty would need to be made. But like so many of this government's decisions, this was the wrong one, and it was a terrible one. So, Conference, I urge on you to call on the government to ditch this dreadful legislation, to spend £120 million of our money in a better way, improving people's lives, and to restore our right to turn up at the polling station and vote them out. Back our motion to scrap the voter ID scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Now I'd like to ask Tom Campion to stand by and call Sam Al-Hamdani to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Conference, and I'm actually speaking against the motion. Look, voter ID is unnecessary. It is an answer to a question that doesn't exist, and it is a response to the lies of this floundering, failing, awful Conservative government. And they have no shame. They need to be beaten. They deserve to be beaten, and they will be beaten by us. Okay. But this motion, it states the facts. It would repeal the current government policy And both of those things are fine and laudable things to do. But I want you to just take a step back. Ask what we want to achieve. Is this policy the best way to achieve that? And what else might it do? I think, first of all, the motion fails to address positive engagement. It removes the unnecessary hurdle of voter ID, but it doesn't go to excluded voters and include them. And removing voter ID is not the only way to do that. And I don't think it's even the best way. But the other bit of this is something that's a lot harder to address. It's about trust and it's about belief. Trust in our politics, in our politicians, in people is broken. And the reason why the Tories can lie and demonise and create these false narratives is because that trust is broken. And people believe something is wrong. And however much we turn up and we say, but those aren't the facts, they still get believed because they still feel right when they hear that because it tallies with that belief that they have. Now, and let's not forget, a large majority of people are in favour of voter ID. And I do hear time and again, and in place after place, and particularly about postal voting, concerns. And this motion fails to make those people feel heard. Now, I saw someone walking around conference with a Fight Like a Liberal t-shirt, and I loved it. But fighting like a Liberal is not just about fighting with facts. It's about fighting by listening to people and making them feel heard. We need to undo the lies, the hatred of this Conservative government. We need to do better than them, but we need to do it not just in what we do, but how we do it. And while voter ID is unnecessary, if this policy makes people not feel heard, we've broken that trust a little bit more. Conference, vote for what you believe in. And I am really not expecting to win this battle. But I hope that before you vote, you ask yourself, is this motion the best way to stop people being excluded? And if it doesn't make people feel heard, is it going to heal that trust, or is it going to make it worse? Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Now I'd like Liz Jarvis to stand by, and I call Tom Campion to speak. Tom is also a PPC for Berwick-upon-Tweed.
Thank you, Conference. Now, although I've been welcomed to the stage as Tom Campion, I was actually born Thomas Chapman, a completely different name to the one I have now. And many of you will know, changing a name is a bit of a faff, and getting a passport sorted at the moment, nightmare. So I found myself in a position in May where I could be a councillor on a local authority, I could hold elected position, but could I go and vote? No. I did not have ID in my name where I was a councillor. How ridiculous is that? That just shows you how unthought out this awful Tory policy is and why it's so important we scrap it. Now, not only that, but as was said, I'm the PPC for Berwick-upon-Tweed, a beautiful constituency, but a rural constituency, where often people will travel miles and miles to go cast their vote. And those are the people who concern me when it comes to voter ID, because they're the ones who are going to go, do you know what? I'm not going to bother coming back because I didn't bring the right document with me. They're going to be the ones who go, do you know what? I didn't see the information. And they're going to be the people who become voiceless because of this Tory government. Now, as I say, I'm also a councillor, and I sit on the committee at Newcastle City Council where we got the updates about voter ID and the absolutely ridiculous costs that it has on local authorities. Newcastle was having to employ bouncers at polling stations because of the arguments it feared would happen because of people being turned away from the polling station. Bouncers at polling stations in modern 21st century Britain. How can anybody look at that situation and think, yes, that's completely fine, let's carry on? Finally, I want to mention the plight of the student. Now, students often vote at university rather than home, and they might not have ID with their university address on. The NUS totem card might be accepted as a form of ID, but a young person's bus card isn't. This motion has disproportionately impacted young people, a group we already struggle to engage in voting in elections. Conference, this is just a few of the many reasons why this awful policy must be scrapped and why I will be voting to support this amendment, and I hope you will too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Now I'd like to ask Paul Radcliffe to stand by and Liz Jarvis to speak.
Good afternoon, Conference. It's been 4 years since I stood on the stage of Conference and told you why I had joined the Liberal Democrats. Since then, I am proud to have been elected as a borough councillor in Eastleigh, one of our flagship Lib Dem councils, and as our PPC, I'm working to win back Eastleigh for the Lib Dems at the next general election. But Conference, I'm worried. We are facing an unprecedented assault on our democracy by this shameful Conservative government. It began with the unlawful proroguing of Parliament in 2019, and it has continued with bills which are an attack on our civil liberties. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, admitted there were just 6 cases of suspected voter fraud in the 2019 general election. So the Conservatives' voter ID scheme is simply a blatant attempt by a zombie government to cling on to power by suppressing democracy and preventing people from marginalised communities from voting. It's also a colossal waste of money during a cost of living crisis. When I was campaigning in the local elections in May and in the Somerton and Frome by-election, I spoke to countless people on the doorsteps who were concerned about the new rules on voter ID. One young mum told me she felt ashamed because she had always tried to impress on her daughters the importance of voting, and she was now worried she wouldn't be able to vote herself. I spoke to people without passports or driver's licenses, or who didn't have access to computers, or who were simply unaware they needed voter ID. It is the people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds who are losing out from this draconian law, the very people who need a change in government the most. In Eastleigh, we do everything we can to encourage our residents to register for postal votes and remind them of the change to the rules. But Conference, we know that thousands of people across the country couldn't vote in the local elections, that thousands more could find themselves excluded from voting in the next general election. As a journalist who has spent time in countries with closed autocracies and electoral autocracies and countries where democracy is relatively new and can never be taken for granted, I find that very concerning indeed. People must be allowed to have a say in who governs them, and it's up to us to give them their voices back. Conference, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Can Dr. Mick Taylor stand by? Paul Radcliffe come to speak, please, and Catherine Smart to backstage. Paul is a local member and Membership Development Officer.
Right, good afternoon, Conference. Being a veteran of 5-party conferences, I have never spoken before, but I feel compelled to speak about voter ID. Having witnessed in the local elections in May, anger directed at councillors about people with no idea and who were less able to use technology to prove their identity. On the same day, I saw a voter who I knew turned away because he had the wrong ID, and a work colleague unable to vote because he had no ID and was not able to get online verification to verify his identity on polling day. The campaigning spirit of a family friend and former suffragette, Leonora Cohen, from Leeds, who broke the Crown Jewels case in 1913, is very much in my mind. She would be campaigning for this injustice if she had been around today. I recognise that voter fraud is very rare, and the introduction of voter ID will stop people from voting and will cause big delays at polling stations. That is quite often ill-equipped to cope with our Victorian voting system. Vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now, I'd like Catherine Smart to stand by and Dr. Mick Taylor to speak, please.
When I was 18, I campaigned in the Derry by-election for the Liberal candidate Claude Wilton. And I was asked to take a lady to vote. And she put on a big coat and a scarf over her head, and I drove her to the polling station, and 30 seconds later she came running out and said, "They've spotted me." And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, well, I was voting for somebody else." "How many times have you done it?" "Oh, today, 11 times. Now, that's Northern Ireland, and I accept that it's different, but they have voter ID, no problems with it. Now, how many of you have heard of a tendered ballot? Yeah, well, most of you haven't. Now, supposing you go to vote and the presiding officer says, "I'm sorry, sir, madam, you can't vote, you've already done so." And you ask, and you argue about that, and eventually the presiding officer will produce a pink ballot paper and he will allow you to vote on it. And that ballot paper will not be looked at and not counted unless the election is disputed. Now, I suggest all of you go back to your constituencies and ask the returning officer how many tendered ballots were issued at the last local election. I did that in Leeds, and I was told 8 in one ward. Now, it seems to me if 8 tendered ballots were issued, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I discovered that the Labour Party were knocking up not to find out who had voted, but to find out who hadn't and wasn't going to. And then they sent someone else to vote for them. And my late wife lost an election because of personation. Not many people get prosecuted because it's not an easy thing to spot. But it happens, more in big cities than other places, but it happens. Now, there's nothing wrong with the principle of voter ID. There's a hell of a lot wrong with the system we've got, but that's different. So I don't want the Liberal Democrats to turn their backs on the concept of voter ID. We are the only country in Europe that doesn't have it. Everyone else has voter ID, and that's fine. They don't have a problem with it. Our system is crap, and it needs to be changed. But don't abandon it, because if you think there's not personation going on, you're wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Can I ask Samuel Jackson to stand by and Catherine Smart to speak, please?
Good afternoon, conference. Whether or not we think there's personation, whether or not we object on principle to voter ID, I'm afraid we've got it, and I fear that we will be stuck with it because I can't see this Tory government changing their mind, and Labour perhaps know too much about personation, as we've just been hearing. Therefore, I think we need a plan B. Yes, pass this motion, but let's have a plan B. Let's improve the system. And for a start, let's widen the list. It is nonsense that if an elderly body takes a grandchild over 18 with them to the polling station, the grandma can use her bus pass, granddaughter can't. It's nonsense. Why? Army identification is fine. NHS identification, oh no. You can clap for them, but you can't approve their identification. Students, as we've heard, some don't always have an identification, a passport or driving license at the address where they're going to be voting. What's wrong with a student travel card? What's wrong with a student card if it's got a photo ID done under strict circumstances, which student travel cards, NHS cards are? What's wrong with them? Let's have a plan B of widening the list of acceptable ID cards. Let's have plan B of making local authority cards much more available and getting the local authorities, okay, government, cough up a bit of money and help them to make sure that everybody who's on the register knows how to get hold of a card and help them to do it. Possibly even allowing, perish the thought, political parties to help people get accessible cards, not be quite so fussy about the postal vote. You know, you can't touch it except with a glove and a pair of tongs, and not even then. Allow local authorities to help people allow local parties to help people get local authority cards. Make it available, make it possible. Let's have a plan B, because I think, I'm afraid to say, we're going to need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Now I'd like to ask Baroness Kath Pinnock to stand by and Samuel Jackson to speak, please.
Hello, conference. This is my first time speaking at conference. Voter ID requirement, as has already been said, is costly, completely unnecessary for the task that it was assigned, namely tackling voter personation, and it is in all likelihood designed purely to reduce the impact of non-Conservative voters. You don't have to take Jacob Rees-Mogg's word for it. The criticism of voter ID requirements as being ableist, ageist, and prejudiced against employment status and ethnicity has also been criticised by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Democracy and the Constitution and the Local Government Information Unit. While I do commend Helen Morgan for her legislative efforts, we must ask ourselves, is this enough? Most of the measures of the Elections Act, principally the erosion of the independence of the Electoral Commission and the retention of first-past-the-post for Metro, mayoral, and police and crime commissioner elections, after it replaced supplementary voting, this would barely get us back to square one. We must ask ourselves, as a progressive party, how can we say that that is progress? We are probably the most vocal party in favour of proportional representation, which is in stark contrast to both the Conservatives and Labour. Given how first-past-the-post is still the electoral system that we use to elect the House of Commons, we have to ask ourselves, if we are successful in repealing voter ID requirements, what is to stop a future government from reintroducing them purely for their own electoral advantage? We have to go further if we are to be taken seriously as a reformist party. Whilst I do urge members to support this motion as a whole, I do urge conference to consider how we can go further in our reformist efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Samuel. And I now call on Baroness Kath Pinnock to summate.
Conference. Fellow campaigners, those of us who knock on doors during elections, we were right. Right to suspect that the Conservatives were deliberately making it more difficult for many people to vote. It wasn't anything about personation. I'm sorry, Michael Taylor, I disagree with you. It was nothing about dealing with the very, very small number of incidents of personation that occur. It was always about making it more difficult for people to vote, especially more difficult for those who would not be likely to vote Conservative. Now, as the wonderful Helen Morgan MP has rightly said, right from the start, both in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, we have stood up against this, this dirty trick campaign from the Tories. And there was an opportunity that Helen referred to in the House of Lords for us to put an end to this voter ID system. Because what they had to do was bring regulations through the House of Lords to all the details of how it was going to be implemented. So we rightly said, as Liberal Democrat team, no, this is our chance. This is an opportunity to stop voter ID. And we put the case. We were supported by people from all parts of the House. But when it came to the vote, guess what Labour did? Did they vote with us? Did they end it? No, they abstained. So when they say to you, or speak up in council groups or wherever you are doing elections, that they wanted to end voter ID, that is not true. Now, very quickly, the Electoral Commission has a long report, and I urge people to look at it. I'm just going to pick out 3 of their recommendations. 1, they are saying people can attest for somebody else. Go into a polling station and say, I know this person, they're my neighbour, I'll stand up for them, that they are who they are. That is quite radical. Number 2, increase the list of voter ID that's acceptable. Especially for young people, I have to say. 3rd one, to help more people with disabilities use their right to vote. Because we know 14,000 were excluded. But in the end, you can make a bad law a bit better, but what we need to do is end a bad law.
Thank you, Kath. And now I'd like the votes for the motion, please, in the hall. The online voting is already open. Votes for. Yeah. Thank you. And now votes against. We're just checking the... Yeah, okay. And the motion is carried. Thank you. I'd like to thank my aide, Hannah Kitching, and Hall aide, Darryl Smalley, and now I'd like to hand over to Nick da Costa for the next motion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, conference. We're going to try and kick off as quick as possible. Those of you who are moving round, please find your seats as quickly, quietly and safely as possible. Okie dokie, we're now kicking off with F31, tackling the housing crisis. You can find this on page 81 of your agenda. We have 3 amendments. A couple of requests from me before I kick off. Firstly, I'm going to apologise in advance and at the end for all of those I haven't been able to call. We have been definitely very oversubscribed with speakers' cards, so I apologise profusely to everyone I don't call. In the interests of time and for us to squeeze as many people in as possible, I am going to be very strict on the red light so that we don't have anyone running over. In addition, if I ask you to stand by, could you please go to the standby seat, which you can find over there. This means we can reduce waiting time as people walk to the stage. We just want to try and cut out as much waiting time as possible. We have 3 amendments on the agenda. So with that in mind, could I please ask Janie Little to stand by and ask Helen Morgan, the MP for North Shropshire, to move the motion.
Thank you, Nick. Conference, we all know that Britain faces a housing crisis. We urgently need to build homes at scale to ensure that everyone can access their basic right to a decent, warm and safe home. That's why I'm delighted to be proposing this motion and bringing forward the paper Tackling the Housing Crisis to this autumn conference. The central message of this paper is this: we want to build more homes. We need to build more homes, and we will build more homes urgently. Liberal Democrats will give significantly more power to local authorities to build the homes we need, and we will hold developers to account when they don't. Now, the housing crisis affects every part of Britain, whether you are in affluent North London or any part of London, a sparsely populated North Shropshire. Nearly a third of my casework is about unsuitable, temporary or downright dangerous housing. Now, we know that the crisis has particularly impacted young people who face rents that are going through the roof and cannot afford to get on the housing ladder. And the impact of this crisis on the most vulnerable is hugely damaging. As ever, it is the most vulnerable people who suffer most. Decades of neglect of social housing have left 1.2 million people on social housing waiting lists. Meanwhile, more than £9 billion a year of taxpayers' cash ends up in the hands of private landlords in the form of housing benefit. It's outrageous. So that's why we're bringing forward an ambitious target for social housing. Conference, Liberal Democrats will build 150,000 new homes for social rent every year. Now, the cost of living crisis has made both renters and mortgage holders deeply worried about staying in their homes. Conservative promises to make life better for renters by banning no-fault evictions and to end the medieval leasehold arrangement that we have yet to see the light of day. The proliferation of second homes and holiday lets is also harming tourist destinations from London to York and the Lake District to Cornwall. Local people are being priced out of the market. In rural areas, communities are dying, schools and GP surgeries are becoming unviable, and local shops and businesses are closing. Once again, the Conservatives have just failed to protect communities, instead protecting the right of people to buy a second home unchecked. Conference, for all these reasons, we are proposing a radical departure from the orthodoxy on housing, an orthodoxy which has comprehensively failed. And that is national housing targets. Conference, national housing targets do not work. They have been in place for decades, and they have utterly failed to deliver the homes we need. If national If national housing targets worked, we wouldn't be in a housing crisis. And because of those targets, we've placed the most basic human need in the hands of a market that doesn't work. In 2015, the Conservatives promised a target, 200,000 starter homes by 2020. Conference, how many were built? Not a single one. In 2017, a new target was introduced, a national target of 300,000 homes per year to be primarily met by private developers, a target very similar to the one proposed in Amendment 1. It has demonstrably failed. And why has it failed? Not necessarily all because of planning. Planning permissions have exceeded 300,000 houses on average over the last 6 years, despite chronic underfunding in planning departments. It failed because building rates have reached nowhere near that level. And to make matters worse, the provision of affordable and social housing has been woeful. That's because developers need to make a return, and they make most money out of larger homes. They build those homes at a slow rate that will keep local prices stable. And they water down their affordable homes commitment after planning permission has been granted on the basis of commercial viability. And Conference, I know this because I used to be the financial controller of a development company. In London and across the country, developers obtain planning permission for land and they sit on it until they can make the most profit. They are not interested in building homes at pace and the houses that we need. It's absolutely clear that we need a policy that will actually deliver homes. If you care about the most vulnerable people, if you care about getting young people on the housing ladder, building homes is all important. And national housing targets, no matter how attractive the headline figure looks, will not do that. And despite what you might be about to hear, we're not proposing to abandon targets, full stop. Michael Grove's screeching U-turn in the face of his own NIMBY rebels has shown us that that doesn't work. In fact, it's been a disaster. But we will replace a meaningless and unworkable national target that only works for property developers. And we'll replace it with independently assessed, binding local targets, detailing the type of homes that local area will need for the future. Councils won't be able to avoid their responsibilities or shunt them over the border, and they'll be empowered to build their own social housing where that's what they need. Now, alongside that, there will be a national target of 150,000 new homes for social rent per year, the homes that we desperately need and that government can build itself. It's ambitious, it can be delivered, and it will ease the pressure on the housing market at the point it is most needed. Britain's only ever built houses at the scale we need to now when it's invested in social housing. And we want to return to that plan because the evidence shows us that will work. But we also need to look at wider implications. We need to embrace modern methods of construction to deliver those numbers of houses in a way that won't shatter our targets to reach net zero. Companies delivering this have collapsed in numbers recently because they don't have a reliable pipeline of orders to work efficiently. A social housing plan will deliver that certainty in the way that the private development market cannot. But most importantly, we want to bring the community with us, reducing one of the biggest barriers to new homes, NIMBYism. By expanding neighbourhood planning to deliver more community buy-in and ensuring that new developments are built with the infrastructure they need, people in our communities will feel part of a discussion and not just a powerless observer. We'll tackle the crisis in tourist hotspots by defining holiday lets and empty second homes as separate planning classes. And we will enable local authorities to decide whether they have the right balance for their communities and their tourist industry and to control that balance in the future. And Conference, Liberal Democrats will deliver a fair deal for renters too. That means ending no-fault evictions once and for all and making sure longer-term tenancies are the default. We would commission a review to abolish, finally, the current system of leasehold and give leaseholders back control over their homes. It's a feudal system that simply has no place in the modern world. In the face of the cost of living crisis, we'll ensure that homes are built to zero carbon standards, cutting bills and emissions. and we will start a 10-year emergency programme to retrofit our homes with insulation to end fuel poverty. Now, I want to thank everyone who is engaged with the process of bringing this debate to conference. It's really important, and I know many of you will be speaking today. I also want to thank the Policy Working Group and its chair who have tackled this hugely important issue so thoroughly. We all agree we desperately need more homes for people to live in, the homes people need in the communities they want to live in. Now, Amendment 3 is a constructive amendment to actually deliver these homes. This paper wants to build more homes, and these proposals push us even further to build the homes we need. So we're delighted to accept this pro-house building amendment along with Amendment 2. But conference, if you care about building houses and ending the housing crisis, then I urge you to reject Amendment 1. Because national housing targets do not work. They didn't work a decade ago, they don't work today, and they won't work in the future. So, conference, that's why I urge you to back a new approach. Let's solve Britain's housing crisis, and let's get building by voting in favour of the motion, by backing Amendments 2 and 3, and rejecting Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Councillor Chris White to stand by, and I call Janie Little from North Somerset to propose Amendment 1.
Thank you, Conference. It's great to see some energy in the room this morning, this afternoon. Conference, we have come to, obviously, one of the most anticipated parts of Conference, the amendment to keep our party's commitment to a national housing target of 380,000 homes a year. The last time we had a debate about whether to abolish our commitment to a national housing target was only 2 years ago at Autumn Conference in 2021. That was the second time in recent years that we have had this debate, and today is the third. It is so disappointing to have to debate this yet again. Last time we debated this, we saw young person after young person making speeches about how our generation has been failed, about how fearful we are for our futures when homes are so unaffordable, and perhaps most importantly, about how important it is for our party to have an ambitious response to the housing crisis. It is abundantly clear that young people in this party do not support this move to abolish our commitment to a national housing target. For many of us, this is not just a debate on policy, but a debate on whether we as young people will ever have a realistic prospect of owning our own home. Housing is unaffordable for far too many, with the average UK house price being £290,000 in July this year. That is an increase of 173% since 1997. And it's not as if wages have kept up with the rise. House prices are rising at nearly twice the speed of wages. With such a disparity between housing price and income, it's no wonder why so many young people struggle to save for a deposit. The Liberal Democrats should be a natural home for young people. We have long advocated for more action in response to climate change. We have a strong record on education, and we are unequivocal in our support for human rights and equal opportunity. Supporting a national target is a clear signal to young people that we as Liberal Democrats are listening and that we are not going to leave young people behind. But by abolishing national housing targets, well, our commitment to such, we are leaving young people unclear on our commitment to building more homes and disillusioned with the Liberal Democrats. We cannot afford to lose young people's votes and voices again. Local government must play an important role in this crisis, of course. We are not saying that a national target is a solution on its own. Instead, we see a national target as complementary to local targets. Above all, we see it as an ambition to drive all of our fantastic councillors from across the country to deliver the change we as a nation need. We as young people feel ignored and let down by those at the top of our party. This is not the first time we've had to plead our case. I'm proud to stand here on behalf of young Liberals, grassroots party members, councillors, council leaders, candidates and 149 members from over 70 local parties who have signed our amendment. And conference, I'm asking for your support today for all of us with one ambition, to one day have a home of our own. Please vote in favour of this amendment to show that we are the party for young people, for housing and opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Josh and Palmer to stand by, and I now call Councillor Chris White to propose Amendment 2.
Good afternoon, Conference. Just before I turn very specifically to Amendment 2, I'd just like to point out that it says in the paper that the government has made housing targets advisory. Sadly, for those of us trying to deliver local plans, it has done no such thing. Michael Gove has spoken to Conservative MPs, issued a few press releases, made a few tweaks, but as at this moment there has been no change, and we have tested that through parliamentary question. So I guess never quite safe to believe a Tory minister. That said, in St Albans we know that the key thing is to make sure that we build social housing. The executive estates will build themselves. Now, for this amendment, the first thing is to look at the fact that there are already 2 million homes waiting to be built either through planning permissions or local plan designations. We need to unblock these homes, and therefore we propose, first of all, financial incentives to use brownfield sites. These are naturally seen by developers as more difficult to build on, but are often better placed to ensure sustainability within existing settlements. Secondly, we need more effective planning permission expiry rules than the current rule, which is essentially dig a trench and you're okay, mate. It's got to be better than that. If you don't use it, you lose it. And thirdly, we need to have more investment in early infrastructure. Basically, infrastructure needs to go in first, not last, or indeed in many cases, not at all. Now, in addition, too many areas suffer from the office to residential conversion loophole. A clumsy sentence, now I look at it again. Not only does this make a nonsense of some local plans, in St Albans we lost nearly all of our offices as a result, so we've had to rebuild them, and then COVID came along, well done us. But it also creates poor quality conversions which are poorly lit, poorly located, or poorly soundproofed. In addition, the essential cash that local authorities need to compensate for the services which suffer more pressure is lost in this form of planning permission. Our proposal is a modest one, namely to insist that where there is permitted development, then the local authority should have the power to insist that social and affordable housing is included. Now, some might argue that this undermines the whole concept of permitted development, and it's an allegation I'm just going to have to put up with. The final scandal is the failure to use publicly owned land. Tory-controlled Hertfordshire County Council owns a building in my electoral division. Over 10 years ago, we asked what they planned to do with it. It's a disused building, and we were told that the council was seeking an alternative service use. 10 years later, we asked again, and you can guess what the answer was. Yeah, they're still looking for this alternative service use. The building or the site could be used for social housing in the middle of St Albans. It's a small example, and many of you know far worse examples. Giving the planning authority the power to mandate a change of use to social housing when these sites are brought forward would enable a further improvement in the ability to deliver social housing. Fundamentally, that's what this motion is all about, and that's what this amendment is all about as well. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Joe Harris to stand by, and I now call Joshua Palmer from Harrow to move Amendment 3.
Despite what the Conservatives like to claim, the true party of opportunity, opportunity for everyone, has always been the Liberal Democrats. Our party constitution commits us to a world in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty. Our former leader, the great Paddy Ashdown, summed it up. Everyone deserves the chance to be somebody. And if we truly believe this, we must be ambitious on solving the housing crisis. Where you live has a profound impact on your life. It influences the job opportunities available to you, your ability to start a family, even the friendships you can make. So let's consider two individuals, Emma and Bob, both 20-year-old students at the same university. Emma hails from Swanage, while Bob is from London. Both enthusiastically applied for an internship in London and received offers. However, Bob's situation is notably different from Emma's. He can readily accept the offer, staying at home with his family in London during the summer, and position himself for a promising career in his chosen field. In contrast, Emma faces a more challenging scenario. A single room in London right now can go for upwards of £1,000 a month. Without family support, Emma might be blocked from taking that opportunity, her chances stunted by the housing crisis. So what can we do to fix this? Ultimately, the crux of the issue is in housing supply. The controversy is in the approach. The Liberal Democrats are a party rooted in community-first principles, and it's in that principle that we present our amendment. No community wants to stagnate, wants to force their children to rent miles away. Many communities are eager to expand their housing options, and in drafting this amendment, we work constructively with HQ and the leadership to propose actionable solutions which will build more homes, whilst ensuring local people are in control. We propose autonomy and a voice for social tenants in their housing choices, exploration of new methods for communities to support new development, and enabling residents to advocate for more homes in their neighbourhoods. Furthermore, our amendment underscores the pivotal role that our built environment plays in the fight against climate change. It highlights our collective responsibility for sustainable development, recognising our role as stewards of the planet. One example of our sustainable and community-focused vision is in community land auctions, a policy Ed Davey helped propose over a decade ago. Currently, when land is given permission to build new homes, it can increase in value over 80 times. Currently, the vast majority of this goes to the landowner, with very little captured by the local authority. Under a community land auction, councils invite landowners to submit sealed bids of land for development. The council then judges these based on the land's suitability and the potential value uplift, allowing the local council to capture that land value uplift, investing that in critical local services, infrastructure improvement, and expanded educational facilities, transport services, and healthcare facilities. I will personally also be voting in favour of Amendment 1. We must commit to building the houses we so desperately need, but we also need mechanisms to build those homes. We need powers and opportunities such that local communities have the ability and incentive to build. Conference, our Amendment 3 does exactly this. It commits us to a uniquely liberal vision for solving the housing crisis. I commend the leadership for working with us and supporting this amendment, so let us wholeheartedly embrace this amendment and take a significant step towards a future where homes are a place of belonging, hope, and sustainable living. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Molly Nolan to stand by, and I now call Councillor Joe Harris from the Cotswolds to speak against Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Can I start by saying, Janie, thank you so much. Although we're on different sides, you're a credit to our party, and the campaign you've led is fantastic. Conference, I stand before you today as the youngest Liberal Democrat council leader in the country, address you not only in this capacity, but also as a young person with a personal stake in the matter at hand. For 10 years, I've lived the housing crisis. From moving out of my parents into a small flat with a girlfriend, it was there I experienced the worst of inflexible and insecure tenure, damp and mould issues, to moving into shared accommodation with friends to share the extortionate cost of the private rented accommodation. And of course, like so many other people my age, moving back in with my parents when the circumstances changed. My friends, the people I grew up with, have fled our area because of the extortionate price of housing. Where I'm from in the Cotswolds, the average house price is now £500,000. That's 14 times the average salary. We don't have a housing crisis, we have a housing emergency. The only form of affordable housing in my area is social rented homes. We need to build more of them and empower councils and local authorities to deliver at scale. Many councils like mine haven't directly delivered council homes for a decade. We're looking to change that, but we need urgency from government and powers to get all councils doing this. The market has failed to deliver the housing we need. We need a social housing revolution to help tackle the housing emergency. Our great country has failed to hit our target for decades. The last time we hit our housing targets is when the state, local councils were delivering council homes in the aftermath of the Second World War. Do we entrust it to local councils and the people who are intimately familiar with local needs, or do we continue down the path of a top-down, developer-led approach that often prioritises greed over the genuine housing needs of our communities? Developers have had their way for nearly half a century, and their approach has given rise to a cartel that has manufactured a housing crisis, locking an entire generation from the dream of owning a home or even renting one. Regrettably, it seems poised to do this to the next generation. This is a crisis that cannot be allowed to persist, and it is within our power to try and change that. I stand here today in full support of motion F31, but against this Amendment 1. Why? Because I'm unwavering in my commitment to ending the housing crisis that plagues our nation. I'm convinced that the key to resolving this crisis lies in the construction of more housing, not arbitrary targets that are consistently missed. What is the point of targets if we never hit them? We have a duty to future generations to address this issue. We must put our trust in local councils and local communities who understand the unique needs of their areas. We must break free from the grip of developers who have prioritised profits over the fundamental human need for shelter and security. So, colleagues, I urge you, fellow delegates, to vote with your conscience and with the future of our nation in mind. Whatever happens, let's put aside our differences and unite in pursuit of a solution to the housing crisis. Today, let's take the first step towards a more brighter and more equitable future for all of us, a liberal Britain and a liberal vision for housing. Thank you, colleagues, and isn't it a great debate? Isn't it great that we're able to do this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Christine Cheng to stand by, and I now call Molly Nolan from the Highlands to speak for Amendment 1.
Conference. A generation of young people in the UK need hope. Hope that with hard work, they will be able to make their way in life. Hope that they will be able to settle down, have a family of their own, in a safe, secure, and healthy environment. Hope that they will be able to follow the generations that have come before them by getting on the housing ladder and securing a home of their own. Now, this motion, broadly, I think is great. I strongly support the focus on increasing social home stock, integrating infrastructure into planning, and abolishing leaseholds, to name but a few. But one of the aims of this motion, to abandon our ambitious national housing target, doesn't seem to support the aspirations that many young people in this country have. Conference, by scrapping our national target, we would be sending a signal that we care more about vested interest than the prosperity of future generations. So much of politics is about perception. And why would young people vote for our party if we are not seen to be committed to building the homes that they need? Conference, I'm a councillor myself. I know that many of my fellow councillor colleagues have to contend with really difficult opposition and difficult situations in their local areas. Changes are absolutely required, and many of the measures in this motion will help address those issues. But this is not sufficient reason to scrap the housing target. I firmly believe it is possible to be both the party of localism and of national ambition. We can champion the needs of our local residents, and we can build the homes that are needed up and down the country. But we need that national target to hold all of us collectively to account and to show voters that we get it and we will do what is required. The Liberal Democrats must be bold and brave and liberal on housing policy. The circumstances demand it of us. So please, rise to that challenge today and support Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Lauren Thomas to stand by and ask Christine Cheng from Kingston, who's speaking lines 482 to 84.
Conference, it is so good to see all of you in person today. I want to argue that lines 82 to 84 on abolishing leasehold are the most important lines in this motion, and I want you to join me in supporting the justice behind these lines and behind the motion as a whole. The residential leasehold system is predatory, feudal, and captured by vested interests. And if you own a flat or you've aspired to buying one at any point in time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My first point is that leasehold is absolutely predatory. 40% of new homes built in England, including 90% of flats, are sold on a leasehold basis. Why is that? It's because the developers actually make a huge profit by selling on the leasehold after the construction is done. That's on the backs of you and me. Part of the quid pro quo is that property management companies can milk leaseholders through these sky-high fees and random charges, and these are really difficult to contest. So leaseholders are just stuck. They have no way of holding that kind of abuse of power to account. And if there's something that we do well as a party, it is holding that kind of power to account. So where these costs need to be shared, the common sense way of dealing with this is to actually think about common hold. And that means that residents can actually have some control over what happens to these costs. My second point here is that leasehold is actually feudal and it perpetuates inequality. If you have taken the time and the energy and all of your life to scrape together the money that you need in order to buy something, to get yourself onto the housing ladder, why should you then have to negotiate a lease extension that is going to cost you thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of pounds? Who is benefiting from this system? It's property developers and property management companies who don't want this system to change. But here is the problem. Residential leasehold is actually captured by vested interests. We all know this. The Leasehold and Common Hold Reform Bill was dropped by the Tories from the Queen's speech at the very last minute. It should have passed, but it didn't. Why is that? It's because vested interests have been very hard at work. Property donors actually provide 25% of the funds for the Conservative Party. As we've said again and again, it's one rule for them and another for the rest of us. Our leader, Ed Davey, has long known these basic truths about the problems with residential leaseholds. He co-founded the all-party parliamentary group on leasehold and common hold reform, and we ought to back him on this. So I hope I've convinced you that these 3 lines on abolishing leasehold are the most important part of this motion. Part of the reason why is because we can actually deliver on this. We can help people with the cost of living crisis by giving them back a measure of control over their maintenance and their fees. And best of all, it costs absolutely nothing to put this in place. Nothing. How many things do you get for free? Nothing. So please support this motion with every fiber of your being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Vikas Agarwal, to stand by, and I call Lauren Thomas from Islington, who's speaking for Amendment 3 and is a first-time speaker.
Hello
Hello, conference. I'm an economist and data scientist in London, and this is my first time speaking. This is actually my first conference. I'd like to start by telling you a little story. Lately, some friends and I have been looking for a house to rent. That means diving headfirst into London's broken housing market. We saw a great place, but the carpet was ripped, of course, and there was loads of random stuff around. So in our offer, we asked for the landlord to repair the carpet and to remove personal effects. Twice we got back emails. The landlord will not be doing that. That is the state of negotiation in London's housing market. Landlords know the balance of power lies with them, and all the tenant protections in the world cannot change the fundamental cause of this brokenness. There's a lot more people who want to live in London, and Oxford, where I used to live, and Cambridge, and so many of the beautiful places in this country that I came almost exactly 3 years ago. But there's not enough housing to house them. But this doesn't have to be the case. We need to increase the supply of housing, both market rate and social. This is one of the most important challenges facing the UK today. More homes will reduce existing housing costs, be better for the environment, and I know how important housing is for the economy. In a world where we built more homes, we wouldn't have to face the hard trade-offs we do today. We could easily generate enough wealth to fix our broken NHS or adequately fund schools. Building more homes of all types will make homes affordable for everyone. Tokyo's done it, Auckland's done it, why not the UK? We are the internationalist party, that's why I'm a member. So look at what the rest of the world has done. I know the UK can do it too. Imagine being able to walk away from a bad landlord or be able to negotiate because you have other options. With new modern housing, higher income individuals would decide to live there instead of houses that already exist. This isn't just theoretical. There's been study after study proving this. And yet, if these homes aren't built, people will instead build up the cost of existing homes, exactly what is happening. I know you know this. I know that's what this motion is about. The problem is we've been trying for years to reform the broken planning system, and it seems like every time we do, it's one step forward and 2 steps back. It's time to show local communities the benefits, not just the downsides of new homes. That's the brilliance of Amendment 3. It will result in more homes and more wealth for communities, a win-win solution that our current system doesn't encourage. Right now, families in cities are forced to choose between overcrowded homes and moving to car-dependent suburbs far from their jobs. Let's allow these family streets to agree to add an extension to their homes so they don't have to face that choice. Right now, social tenants often live in substandard housing. Let's allow them a win-win by being able to live in brand new homes subsidized by estate regeneration. Right now, communities, and I know you know this because we're the localist party, are crying out for new funding for the things we need, but that's what new housing will give us. Let's allow them to get it through community land auctions. The future in 2023 is uncertain. We face a lot of challenges.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
Oh, sorry. But I have faith in human beings to get us through it. But one thing's for sure, there is no path to a better future without homes for all to live in. So let's get it done in a way that actually works. Let's vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Could I please ask Tim Farron to stand by? That's Tim Farron, and I call Vikas Agrawal from Southwark to speak for Amendment 1 and is also a first-time speaker.
Good afternoon, conference. I also identify as young, youngish, lower middle-aged. Look, as a first-gen Brit, I'm proud of what this country has given to me and my family. Aspiration and hope. My dad moved here in the 70s from Tanzania into a bedsit in Wood Green. He got a job as a clerk in a bank. He actually got a second job as well, working in a cinema late at night. He married my mum. They made the decision to move to Gillingham, where they bought a house and raised 3 boys. It wasn't the easiest time to be a migrant in Medway. Certain groups weren't thrilled with new faces moving in, but they persevered and they became part of the community. And so when I see our party speaking up for Ukrainians, for Afghans, for Hong Kong BNOs fleeing war and persecution, I know I'm in the right place. I'm proud that our party is so pro-immigration and so pro-asylum. I'm proud that our country, regardless of what Braverman and Sunak might say, is a welcoming one where people from all over the world can hope to prosper. And I'm proud of our liberal policies that seek to empower people. And actually, more personally, I'm proud that the reason I have a flat right now is because of the hard work of people like Caroline Pidgeon, who fought for more homes when she was my local councillor. The Lib Dems have a great track record of delivering homes, which is why I was so happy to see a defined target for social housing. That is what we should be screaming to high heavens about. And yet, in the minds of people across the country, we're anti-housing. And when we talk about removing targets, when we talk about blocking executive homes, when people like me get called DFLs, it sends a signal to young people, families, ethnic minorities that we're anti-aspiration, anti-growth, and anti-integration. Now, it is right and proper that we're pushing for more social housing, but we also need to be giving hope to people that aren't eligible for social housing, that they can own their own home too. Starter homes, homes to upsize, homes for later life that are easy to maintain, homes for new arrivals, homes that are close to public transport, and homes that are close to green pastures. And let's not forget, building houses creates jobs. Increasing populations support small local businesses. And affordable accommodation improves gender pay equality and mental health. And so, Conference, I'm asking you, please don't send that negative signal. It is all about perception. Reform planning, have local targets that feed into a national target. But please, do not take that hope away for so many looking for a new home. Please vote for Amendment 1 and for Amendment 3, so we can be a party of aspiration and hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Gareth Epps to stand by? That's Gareth Epps. And I call Tim Farron, our MP for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, to speak for the motion.
Afternoon. Now, it's just possible that I may have mentioned that I joined the Young Liberals after I watched Cathy come home and it made me cry. But it didn't make me cry just because Cathy was homeless on the streets and I felt sad about that. It made me cry with anger at the people in authority who shrugged and turned her away. If we don't act effectively to fix the crisis, then we are no better than the miserable blokes in suits in Cathy Come Home who did naff all to help her. And doing naff all on housing is to take the free market approach, because leaving it to the market makes things worse. Acting like the housing market isn't broken makes things worse. So an unspecific housing target makes things worse. At 16, I joined because I wouldn't shrug and do naff all. I am still here because I refuse today to shrug and do naff all. The motion has a specific target of 150,000 new social rented homes a year to transform lives. But, Conference, I'll admit this, if there was a credible amendment today to build 380,000 council houses a year, I'd back it. I reckon I can get away with being a rebel again now. I do not give a monkeys. But Amendment 1 does not do that. It is a vague and vacuous target. And we have had vague targets for years. They're not radical, they're not liberal, they're not you, they're not effective. Thatcher had them, Blair had them, Cameron had them. They achieve naff all, they do not work. Sorry, they do work. They do work. They do work if you are a property investor. They do work if you're a second homeowner. They do work if you're comfortable already and on the housing ladder, because vague targets let and empower developers to build the houses that they want, but never, ever, ever the homes that we desperately need, especially that young people actually need. The authors of Amendment 1 do not mean it, but it is pure Thatcherism. A laissez-faire, free market, winner takes all, bonus for those who see houses as capital investments, holiday hideaways, nice little pension pots, but not homes for the millions who need them. Amendment 1 could be, despite the wonderful speeches genuinely made in favour of it, the most right-wing thing I've seen at party conference since we set Liz Truss off to go and work undercover. Seriously, I have spent my life fighting Thatcherism. I never thought I'd have to do it here. So this Amendment 1 is an electoral gift to the Tories, including right now in mid-beds. But you know what? If it actually solved the crisis, I'd take the hit. I've lost votes in Westmoreland umpteen times by backing new homes to save our communities, but this amendment does not do that. It is a policy to please the investor and to abandon the homeless. I'll take the hit to stand up against NIMBYism, but I will not take an electoral hit to fight the corner of corporate investors. So let's do what the motion says. Set targets not for the houses that the wealthy want, but for the homes that Britain desperately needs. Please back the motion and reject the Free Market Amendment 1, because I'm sick to tears of doing.
Thank you very much. Can everyone stop? Can we try and get on to the next speaker as soon as possible? Can I ask Caroline Gooch to stand by, and I call Gareth Epps from Witney to speak against the motion.
Well, follow that. Conference, I have a question for you. Before we even get on to this issue of whether or not we meet targets to build more homes, can I just ask, what do we need to build them but are short of in this country to the tune of between 200,000 and 250,000? Please don't look through the motion, by the way, or the policy paper. You won't find the answer there. It's not bricks, it's people. The paper has a couple of pages paying lip service to the shortage of workers in construction, but it is desperately short of solutions. Now, I don't know how many of you have put on a hard hat and safety boots recently, but you should try it if you want to find out what the construction industry is facing right now. Now, some reasons are obvious, and building trades, as many of us know, are a clear example. That putting up barriers to trade and barriers to work in this country by pulling up the drawbridge puts up costs, causes businesses to fail, and means you do less of what you need to do for the good of the country. It's now acknowledged on every building site and in the canteens the damage that Brexit has caused. Workers have left the country and they are not being replaced. And the shortage of houses that are being built is very much to do with that as much as it's to do with planning. It's a failure of an unfettered market in which sustainability and quality are sacrificed to cost. The same thing that gives the volume house builders such a bad name. Construction is a great industry. It's one of the few in which social mobility truly exists, and the apprentice can and will rise to become CEO of the biggest projects. But construction skills aren't seen as a priority as a vocation. They're certainly not a priority of the developers, and they certainly haven't been a priority of this government, in spite of report on report from Latham and Egan onwards. And this party has not learned the lessons from any of that. That failure is evident in another area we need to work, modular and modern methods of construction. Now, modular has a number of advantages. It's quicker, it takes fewer people to build it, and it's sustainable. And the motion rightly recognises that you cannot build the homes we need without meet our net zero regulations. But in May, Legal and General, not a small company, halted production at its factory near Leeds, citing not only long planning times, but weak demand. It's as if we've learnt nothing about building green homes from the two big government interventions of the last decade, the Green Deal under the Coalition or the Green Homes Grant. Both deeply flawed because both failed, as this paper does, to recognise the true nature of the problems in the supply chain. There are many good ideas in here, and Joe Harris got it absolutely right. The markets failed to deliver the housing we need, but Conference, we're presented with the wrong choice. This side calls for targets, and they're right, in my opinion, to do so. This side for homes. This paper does not provide the people and resources we need to do either.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Gareth Roberts to stand by, and I call Caroline Gooch from Bristol, who's speaking for Amendment 1 and is a first-time speaker.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm an activist in the Bristol Party, and as you say, it's my first time speaking at Conference, so quite nervous. So I'm urging you, please, to support Amendment 1. There's no reason to abolish the overall housing target of 380,000. It's too complicated to explain it to voters. And as we've already seen, Ed Davey was challenged on this by Laura Kuenssberg's show yesterday morning. And it just comes across as woolly. If you have to explain, you've probably already lost people. Voters' attention span is notoriously short. We know how successful three-word slogans are. We shouldn't be creating headlines that we then have to go back and explain. All of the reasons given for abolishing the overall housing target are spurious. Yes, different areas need different solutions, and you can vary strategy across different areas and still have an overall target. Minimum housing quality can be mandated, and we can still have an overall target. We can improve tenure with leasehold reforms and still have an overall target. We can push for particular locations for houses and still have an overall target. We can tighten up planning and still have a target. We can have aims for particular types of houses, and I love that we want to build more houses for social rent. It still doesn't preclude us from having an additional national target. We can insist on modern building methods. It doesn't preclude us from having a national target. We reform right to buy, and God, we need to. It still doesn't preclude us from having an overall target. The private developers building the executive houses that are the wrong houses in the wrong place, well, they still count towards the target. But hey, why not? Good luck to them. Those buyers who buy those houses will free up property elsewhere. And the young Liberals are not looking to buy those houses, but they appreciate the fact they're getting built. In Bristol, we have 19,000 people on our social housing waiting list. 19,000. In the private rented sector in Bristol, there are 60 applications for every property. We really need a lot more stock, and it really needs to be social housing, but an overall target doesn't preclude that. Regional local variations are factored in as subsets of our overall target, but we need a simple message, not something that we have to explain. I want to say to people on the doorsteps, we've got an ambitious housing target, and more importantly, we've got a council housing target. Basically, it creates the wrong headlines and misleads people if we say we've canned the target. If you have to explain it, it's too complicated. Let's put the target back in. I urge you to support Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Could I please ask Richard Kilpatrick to stand by? That's Richard Kilpatrick, and I call Councillor Gareth Roberts from Twickenham and Richmond, who's speaking against Amendment 1.
Good afternoon. I'm the leader of Richmond upon Thames Council, and I was hosting this morning a meeting, part of London councils, regarding devolution. We're the party of devolution. We're the people who want to give power back to localities. We're the people who want to make sure that decision-making is taken at a local level. And yet we have this amendment which is trying to force us to take a national planning target for housing. We do not need a national target. We need to make sure that we're setting targets locally, which is what the original motion is calling for. In Teddington, we have a development in just right next to the river, the old Teddington Studios, where they used to record Des O'Connor Tonight and stuff like that. Half of it is standing empty. There's a one-bedroom flat in there which costs £610,000 if you want to buy it. Now, that one single-bedroom flat for 610 grand, that counts against the housing target. It's not homing anybody. It's not homing a single person, but because we have to drive ourselves through all of these planning targets and housing targets, it counts. So it's not doing anything. And I dare say that if you go down half of the pubs in Bournemouth this evening, you're not going to find the young people saying, oh, great, we've got this arbitrary target on housing. All they're going to be doing is saying, where is the house which I'm going to live in? Having a target for housing does not solve the immediate problems. It does not solve the emergency. What's good about this actual motion is it does give us a target for social housing. And we've heard earlier from Chris White, wherever he is, talking about reusing government buildings. And it's thanks to Lib Dems in Parliament, to Munira Wilson MP, that we've had a change in the law in London and nationally so that things like police stations do not have to be sold to developers in order to get best value. They can be delivered to local councils, to local housing partnerships in order to provide housing. However, we need that. That's what we need. Not national top-down targets, not national edicts from Mr. Gove or Sadiq Khan, if you're living in London, telling you what you have to build. We need to have localism restored to the planning process. We have to have localism restored to the housing needs that we have and the emergency that we have, and we need to make sure that we are delivering that, not delivering on an arbitrary 368,000 homes, which we are never, ever, ever going to meet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I please ask Paul Brocklehurst to stand by? And I now call Richard Kilpatrick from Manchester to speak for Amendment 1.
Conference, I don't want to give anyone a reason to vote for the Labour Party. And friends, let me take a little bit of time to tell you about the Labour Party and their record on housing. 15,000 properties built in Manchester city centre. How many affordable? How many social houses? How many social or affordable rental houses? Not one. Labour's record on housing is clear to see, letting developers off the hook on affordable housing, compulsory purchase of social housing to replace them with buy-to-leave skyscrapers, sold off to foreign investors, destroying communities, not building them, putting the skyline on a postcard before the housing needs of cities and towns up and down this country. Now, we will hear arguments on both sides about the benefits of having a target or not having a target, and it's very simple. We need a target because without them, local authorities will continue to pass the buck. We need more targets, not less. And Rather, we need lots of targets to meet the ambitions of the types of houses that our communities need. Where the Labour Party hide behind viability assessments, executive housing needs, shared ownership, uncollected Section 106 agreements, Liberal Democrats up and down the country are demanding a fair deal for developers against developers. Elsewhere, developers cozying up to planning committees and they lie through their teeth in viability assessments. And Conference talking about people who lie through their teeth. The Labour Party cry from ever taller rooftops that our housing market is trickled down. They say injecting supply is the answer, and it's not happening. Building executive apartments in city centres only drive up the demand for affordable family homes elsewhere. We have lived it in London, and the Labour Party are making it the same mistakes in great northern cities. And when they lie through their teeth and tell you that the Labour Party is the party of young people, look them in the eye and tell them that having your housing waiting list cut by half by disqualifying people that haven't lived in your area long enough is not delivering on housing. Social cleansing swathes of the city to maximise council tax income is not delivering on housing. Prams and buggies bike-locked outside of beds and breakfasts because they have to live there temporarily for 2 years is not delivering on housing, and Conference neither is deleting our ambition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Martin Hallward to stand by, and I now call Paul Brocklehurst from Newham, Barking and Dagenham to speak for Amendment 1.
For the last 7 years, I've run a national advice service for young people at risk of homelessness. Each week, my team speak to hundreds of young people who don't have stable housing. Today, things are as bad as I've ever seen them. As the cost of living crisis bites, we are facing a housing emergency. People talk about how young people can't afford to buy a house anymore. The reality is, for a lot of young people, they can't afford to rent a house anymore. It's getting harder and harder for my team to guide young people through this landscape of higher rents, unscrupulous landlords and council teams that are overwhelmed with homeless applications. We've even started issuing food bank vouchers, something we've never had to do before. We hear from young people whose mental health is impacted by not having a secure home. And I've heard from too many young people that have been driven to suicidal thoughts through not having a chance of a stable home. So how do we address this housing emergency? I've got a long list of actions that can be taken. Changing to existing legislation, improving processes and closing loopholes, and allocating much greater funding, both for local authorities and for third sectors such as mine. But the most effective intervention we can make to tackle this housing emergency is to build more houses. We need to build and build and build and build and build. It's time to prioritise housing. And the way you do that, the way to signal to everyone that this matters, this is a priority and a focus for a Lib Dem government, is to have a national target. And it's true, the target itself is not enough, so let's set the target and then let's hit the target. We need to fix housing, a fair deal for everyone. Please support Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Stephen Williams to stand by, and I now call Councillor Martin Hallward from Cheltenham to speak against Amendment 1.
Conference, housing targets don't build houses. If they did, we'd be fine. Years back, following national rules, 3 Gloucestershire councils agreed to plan for 35,000 new homes. Cheltenham's local plan added 1,000 more. We did plan more bloody houses, hundreds of them in my backyard, in my ward. But alongside them, the Lib Dem local plan protected the species-rich and accessible green fields most important to local people. We used the local green space designation I proposed in a policy paper to this conference when I was the last Lib Dem MP for Cheltenham. Implemented in coalition, the designation has been used 6,000 times across the UK to protect green spaces for people, including young people, not just newts and landscape painters. Never think, conference, that how you vote here doesn't matter. The next Lib Dem MP for Cheltenham will be Max Wilkinson. His pioneering local climate policy means almost all those houses will be off the gas grid. The first zero-carbon private sector housing estate is already being built in my ward, and we backed it. And it's 40% affordable because we're tough on that too, and we're committing millions to new social housing. More bloody houses, low carbon, lots of affordable, and green spaces protected too. Local Lib Dems in action. But that huge 35,000 target has come back to haunt us. Turns out, house building at that scale is much more complicated than a slogan on a t-shirt. Big strategic developments, complicated by planning for infrastructure, schools, local facilities, by motorway junctions, pandemics, national shortfall of planning officers, and slow developer build-out rates we can't control. So no, we're not meeting that target. It's become a giant stick with which to beat us. So now unelected inspectors are allowing appeals on sites we never planned to build on AONB and ancient orchard sites vital for nature that are just cheaper for developers who want a 25% margin on new developments. Profit-led, not plan-led. That's what unrealistic targets do in practice, even to outstanding Lib Dem councils. And the latest 350 in my ward? Not waiting on us, or even the inspectorate. In our insanely centralised system, we're all waiting on Michael Bloody Gove. With more power in local hands, we'd have been building something years ago. Conference, the right answers are in this excellent paper. More focus on social housing, invest in people and skills, make needs-based, longer-term plans that councils can defend, empower local people. We've shown that works, but please reject Amendment 1. Huge national targets make headlines, not houses. They'll ambush local decision-making and conference. They won't work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Louisa Porritt to stand by? That's Louisa Porritt. And I now call Stephen Williams from Bristol to speak for Amendment 1.
Good afternoon, Conference. There is a proud Liberal record for over a century on housing. In Seamills, in the north of my former constituency of Bristol West, there is an oak tree called the Addison Oak, because in 1919, Christopher Addison, the first housing minister, planted an oak tree after he turned the sod on building the nation's first council houses, delivering on Lloyd George's promise that in the 1920s he would build a land fit for heroes to live in. I'm the most recent housing minister that we've had. And when we were last in government, we specifically raised the borrowing cap for local authorities so they could build more council houses again. We stopped letting agents from double dipping their fees onto both landlords and tenants. I introduced the first legislation to stop unfair evictions. And to stop the practice of rabbit hutch homes, I reintroduced space standards that had been abolished by Thatcher. So that's a pretty good record. But the thing I was most proud of was introducing the legislation for zero-carbon homes that was abolished, that was suspended by Osborne and Cameron when they were in power on their own in 2016. Just imagine in the last 7 years, if we'd built all of our new homes to the toughest environmental standards in Europe, and moreover, house builders have put money into retrofitting older houses as well. Now, we know that the Tories have failed since they've been in government of their own, and other governments have failed as well to meet national targets. But could that be, Tim, because the wrong people have been in charge? I haven't been to a Lib Dem conference for 8.5 years, but I don't think it's our job to define ourselves by other people's failure. I think we set ambitions for ourselves, we aim to achieve them when we get into office. I want to compete with the Tories on energy-efficient homes. I want to compete with them on building more social housing. I'm delighted by the 150,000 national target that is in the main motion. But I don't want to enter into a race with the Tories on a race to the bottom on NIMBYism. So let's compete with the Tories. Let's not let the national government off the hook if there is no national target. Let's not give mixed signals to the housing market. Let's not allow our unscrupulous opponents to say the Liberal Democrats are once again not on the side of young people. In the 2020s, we don't need homes for heroes, but we do need homes fit for climate change. We do need homes that are available for young people. Let's tell young people we are on their side, and let's be the party of housing again. Vote for Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Lord Andrew Stunnell to stand by? That's Andrew Stunnell. And I now call Louisa Porritt from Camden to speak for Amendment 1.
Conference, there are good things to say about this motion, particularly the emphasis on social housing and a community-led approach. However, I'm going to speak in favour of Amendment 1, tabled by the Young Liberals, to maintain our national housing target. I have proudly stood for London Mayor and served as a councillor in Camden, a part of the country where the average house price is now over £1 million. Typically, those on the housing waiting list have to wait for 4 years and not uncommonly a decade for somewhere affordable to live. This is not just a London problem. The National Housing Federation says more than 8 million people have some form of unmet housing need. I've seen firsthand how the squeeze on supply has driven residents out of the area that they call home. I was one of them because I couldn't afford the private rental costs of Camden and to save to buy my first home at the same time. For most young people today, the thought of buying a home is a pipe dream. The rental costs they face are extortionate. If we are not willing to be brave and say we will tackle the issue of undersupply across the whole of the market, from social housing to the private sector, we will continue to deprive not only young people, but many others of the affordable, safe, good quality homes they deserve. Conference, the Conservatives and Labour have failed to deliver the homes people desperately need, and with that, the dignity and security they deserve. Just 2 years ago, we adopted an ambitious national housing target in line with independent estimates of what the need is in this country. Tim, were we Thatcherites then? Maintaining that target does not mean existing local communities won't benefit. Just look at Liberal Democrat-run Richmond, where the council has allowed the Stag Brewery application to pass. Conference, if this project goes ahead, the council would receive £35 million of funding via the Community Infrastructure Levy. And guess what? As a local administration, the money they'd receive could free up funds elsewhere to deliver the social homes that the borough needs. Don't get me wrong, I've seen the worst of unchecked behaviour by developers. In the ward I used to represent, there's a site that's still not begun construction 8 years after approval. We are not the Tories. We opposed that development because the community were right to foresee that the developer would let them down.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
I am, thank you. But if we don't set an ambition for the number of homes that this country needs, we won't scratch the surface of the housing crisis. Conference, I urge you to support Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Rob Blackie to stand by? That's Rob Blackie, and I now call Andrew Stunnell from Hazelgrove to speak against Amendment 1.
Conference, I want to let you into a secret. Housing developers are in it for the money. Long experience has taught them that the best way to make more money is to build fewer homes than people actually want to buy. That keeps house prices rising and developers' land banks growing in value. Developers' only interest in big national targets is how much easier they make it to bully ministers into relaxing environmental rules and bullying councils into releasing even more land for inappropriate development in the wrong place, with even fewer checks on quality and standards. That's how it worked in 2015, when they lobbied the Tories to scrap the zero-carbon homes regulations that Stephen Williams and I had lined up. Their argument was that it would speed up house building. It didn't produce a single extra home, and the ones they did build have all been substandard and will need upgrading again to meet the 2050 standard. It did, however, produce 1 million sites with planning permission, but no houses on them. Higher housing targets are good news for developers, not because it makes them build more homes, it doesn't, but because it's good leverage to get an easier ride on lower energy and environmental standards, nice flat sites on floodplains with shorter routes to discharge sewage into rivers, and of course, they can make bigger profits and bigger donations to the Conservative Party. Now, they tried it again this year with nitrate neutrality rules, full of stories about the extortionate cost of being made to treat their sewage before they dumped it in the streams. And the Tories fell for it, but in the House of Lords, the Liberal Democrats stopped it. Conference, housing developers are in it for the money. Whatever the target, it won't move the dial. They will always aim to build slightly fewer homes than people want to buy. Amendment 1 just makes it that bit easier for them to squeeze concessions out of ministers and planners. And it won't build a single extra home on the way. The developers will see to that. Conference, we desperately need more homes, and F31 can deliver them with the 150,000 new social homes a year we plan. It'll tackle the appalling council house waiting list, and there's so much more in that motion. Don't spoil it with a pointless gesture. Support the motion and reject Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Catherine Macy to stand by, and I now call Rob Blackie from Lambeth, who is our London mayoral candidate, to speak for Amendment 1.
Thank you. Tim Farron, that speech was below you. Tim. Tim, you were better than that. A few days ago, my daughter came to see me. She asked me to abandon her tough but achievable target of tidying her bedroom that night. She told me that my target was arbitrary, it was centralized, it was distracting her, and she'd do a much better job if I just simply removed it. Foolishly, I removed the target. Unsurprisingly, she did not tidy her room. Conference, we face an incredible housing crisis today. In my hometown of London, if you earn the typical wage and you rent the typical bedroom, you are spending more than half your salary on rent. We face the worst housing crisis of any rich country. We spend more on housing benefits to clear up a mess. We get worse housing. We get smaller housing. It is a mess. And nobody here seriously debates that we need to build a lot more housing. But we need to be clear about one thing. Nobody ever wanted a target removed unless they wanted to do less of something. If we remove national targets, then it will, reasonably, be seen as a signal we don't care much about the amount of housing we build. If we remove national housing targets, we are giving up on everything except a safety net. And we can do better than just a safety net. I urge you to vote for Amendment 1 in favour of national housing targets so we can make a good policy paper into a great one. If you think that we need more housing nationally, then please vote for a national housing target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Stephen Robinson to stand by? That's Stephen Robinson. And I now call Catherine Macy from York.
When I was 10, my mother had a breakdown. She had to sell the house, and we ended up moving to a 2-bed. She gave me my own room, and she shared a room with my brother because I was 13 and she felt I needed my own space. I remember watching her cry, and I promised myself I'm going to buy her a house one day. I'm 25 now. I'm about to finish my PhD. I should hopefully find a job that makes me comfortable, but owning my own house is beyond my dreams at the moment, let alone fulfilling my childhood wish of giving my mother stability. Housing targets are one of the only ways we can ensure that we build these houses. We need more social housing, yes, and housing targets will support this. Not only this, but we need to be ensuring that we acknowledge the poorest in our societies. This is my 4th speech, and I'm afraid it's not going to be without disability once again. Disabled people deserve better. We are significantly more likely to be homeless. We are significantly less likely to own our own homes. And even when we can find a home, it's so rarely fit for our needs. My mother entered social housing physically abled, but she is now disabled and desperately struggling to have the adaptations needed for her. Housing is something that is so important to young people. I understand the concerns, but please, imagine being our age and realizing that about 50%, if you are lucky, of your money will go to rent, with no hope of ever getting your own mortgage. Every single person I know who owns a home owns it because of parents. So many of us don't even have that luxury. Please, vote for Amendment 1. Vote to support young people. Do not let us down again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Could I please ask Peter Thornton to stand by? And I now call Stephen Robinson to summate on Amendment 1.
Conference. I've not spoken from this platform for nearly 20 years. Then and now, I speak because I am passionate about sending a clear message to give hope to young people. I lead a majority Lib Dem council. We were re-elected in May despite ambitious housing targets. We gained 3 seats, 2 in a ward which is going to have 1,000 new homes. And our colleagues in Eastleigh, led by the appropriately named councillor Keith House, keeps being re-elected to control with a huge majority and building large numbers of homes. And unfortunately, Keith can't be here because he's sorting out a housing issue. So that's just 2 examples to underline. Having a housing target does not lose votes. But getting rid of a target that we only voted for 2 years ago will lose the votes of young people who will feel betrayed by the Liberal Democrats for the 2nd time in 10 years. So, Amendment 1 is more about politics than it is about policy. It's about the message we send. You may be worried about being attacked for house building numbers by the Tories. But getting rid of a national target won't stop those attacks. If they're going to attack you on that subject, they won't care what the number is. In fact, we know they don't care about facts at all. They just make stuff up. The other bizarre aspect of opposition to Amendment 1 is that all of us are backing that national target for social homes and a target for 10 new towns and binding local targets. If you put those together with the almost 200,000 that the market delivers every year anyway, and we'd be at 300,000 homes a year. So what's your problem? What's your problem with an overall target? It seems we want to build 380,000 homes, but not tell anybody about it. So, let's be clear. Let's be very clear. I agree with Helen. I agree with you, Helen, and others that a national target does not build homes by itself. It needs a whole set of other policies to support it, which are in the paper. The 380,000 target will only come into effect when all these other policies come in as well, because it's our policy, not anybody else's. Joe and Tim and Martin said, what is the point of targets if we never meet them? But you fell into the trap that ALDC has been telling you not to fall into for years, because at national level we are the opposition. So you should have said they have never met them, which is why we need Liberal Democrat policy in this paper. As a council leader, I am telling developers all the time that we are going to hold them to the 35% affordable homes target that the Tories never met, and we are, because we're different. And if they want to plead lack of viability, they need to pay less for the land. What we need is fewer Tory council leaders who give in, and more Lib Dem leaders like me who will not, and a national target to push those Tory leaders. Gareth, can I please draw your attention to the last lines of the amendment? A national target that is delivered via achievable local targets that deliver sustainable communities, not the current system that hands targets to councils from the centre. As a smaller party, we must be bold to be noticed. We rightly criticise Labour for saying very little. Make sure that all councils, not good Lib Dem, just good Lib Dem ones, build enough homes. Give a clear sign to my son's generation that we really care about their hope of a home, and end the scandal of children in bed and breakfast temporary housing, and vote for Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Could I please now call Peter Thornton to the stage to move the motion?
Wow. I'm not sure if I'd rather follow Stephen or follow Tim. You know, it's so wonderful to see such passion. Sometimes I think we don't get angry enough about the dire state of housing in our country. And seeing it here today is quite wonderful. Janie, where's Janie? The T-shirts, about the T-shirts. I'm XL. So send me one, I'll wear it with pride. And Conference, in a few moments, we're going to take a vote. And Conference is going to decide our party's policy. You won't see that in the other two conferences in the next 2 weeks. It's been said, and I'm going to say it again, we need more houses. Not thousands, but millions more houses in this country. We need to make sure that everybody, young and old, can afford a decent home in the place they want to live, especially the vulnerable and the young. And this is what our paper can deliver. Conference, this paper is full of ambitious, practical policies, and they will result in hundreds of thousands of more homes being built every year, including at least 150,000 homes to rent. And these are homes that are badly needed. We need to start replacing the millions of homes sold off by Margaret Thatcher in a shameless attempt to drastically reduce the sector. And of course, it wasn't just an attempt. It did reduce the social housing sector. But this paper contains policies that would empower councils to take on the land bankers and the NIMBYs and deliver those homes we so desperately need. And the policies in our paper are the policies that build homes. And I'm afraid to say it, but the national target doesn't. Now, don't take my word for it. Lord Andrew Stunnell, who spoke just now, you can trust him. Did you know he's the only government minister from any party in recent history to actually increase council housing? Thank you, Andrew. As you've heard, the government has had a national housing target for years, never come anywhere near meeting it, nowhere near, because the national housing target isn't part of the solution, it's part of the problem, because it sets up a confrontational system. Big developers on one side, they just want to build, maximise their profits, and of course, as Andrew said earlier, give large donations to the Conservative Party. They don't give those donations for nothing. And on the other side, you have the communities who need the houses. And in that system, where the only power communities have is to object, what are they going to do? Of course, they say no. But if we get rid of that national target altogether and replace it with our new system of local plans and neighbourhood plans, where communities come together to agree long-term plans for the future with proper consultation and real consideration of what people need, where developers serve the community, not the other way around. If we do that, we can get community buy-in and we can finally get Britain building the houses it needs. Crucially, we can get Liberal Democrat councils elected across the country. Liberal Democrat councils like Eastleigh, you've heard of Keith House, Eastleigh just up the road, and my own South Lakeland, and all of the other Lib Dem councils across our country, and we can build more houses. So, Conference, the choice before you today is really simple. There's our policy paper, which is a real bold plan to build the houses we need, and we can put that on our leaflets, proudly put that on our leaflets. Or, I'm sorry to say this, or Amendment 1, a meaningless housing targets that the Conservatives will put on their leaflets. And they will. Conference, please vote against Amendment 1 and for the motion as a whole.
Thank you very much for that. Okie dokie, we're going to be moving on to a series of 4 votes. The votes on Amendment 1, 2, 3, and then the vote on the motion as a whole. We have opened the online voting already. So, could I please see all cards in, all those in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you very much. And all those against Amendment 1? Thank you very much. We'll just wait for the online vote to catch up. So I'll move on to Amendment 2. Can I see all those in favour of Amendment 2? And all those against? Thank you. Can I see all those in favour of Amendment 3? And all those against? Thank you. We'll just wait for the online vote to catch up. One moment, please. Thank you very much. I can confirm that Amendment 3 has passed, Amendment 2 has passed, and Amendment 1 has passed. Thank you very much. As we're running over time, I now would like to call a vote on the motion as amended by all three amendments. Could those please in favour of the motion please raise your voting card? And those against? Thank you very much. I'm just waiting for the online to catch up. And that motion has passed. Thank you very much, Conference. We now move on to a speech by the amazing Wendy Chamberlain. I'd like to thank my brilliant aides, Eleanor Kelly and Chris Mains. Thank you, Conference.
Colleagues, we are running slightly behind and we need to move on. Could you please leave the hall quietly so that we can start to prepare for the next very important item, which is the speech from Wendy Chamberlain MP. Quietly, please. Thank you. I'm really sorry, colleagues. There is a lot of noise going on. If you are moving out or if you're in the middle of a conversation, please could you do it very quietly, because we do need to move on. There is quite a lot of business left this afternoon. Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, we are now going to move to F32, which is a speech from our Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain MP. I want to introduce this just by saying many of you know her from conference. You will have seen and heard from colleagues what an effective Chief Whip she is, but I have experience of her power of casework in Fife. Last year, when my niece got married, we hired a house in her constituency, and I realised that the owner of the property had an interest in politics. And I didn't say anything about being a Lib Dem. And after 3 days, he said to my husband, "You do know we're Lib Dems, do you?" So I thought, oh. My husband said, "That's lovely." And he said, but you have to tell your wife to come and ask me why. So I did. They were Tories. They had moved to the area as Tories, and they had a Tory councillor. They had repeatedly asked the Tory councillor for help with planning, had got absolutely nowhere. Wendy, and I think Willie Rennie was there as well, and the local Lib Dem councillor turned up. Wendy said, right, we will sort this. Planning permission was granted within 6 months. His business now employs people in Fife. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Wendy Chamberlain, brilliant Chief Whip, an outstanding MP from North East Fife.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you. Good afternoon, conference. It is such a pleasure to be here. As I said at the rally on Saturday night, this is my first in-person autumn conference since I became a Liberal Democrat MP. Yeah, it's pretty good. I remember being here in Bournemouth all the way back in 2019, which frankly feels like a lifetime ago. And when I think back now, I think of lots of pot noodles. I haven't managed to eat one so far this weekend, and not a lot of sleep. And I suspect, like many of our PPCs here today, I was very excited, but really had no clear idea of what was going to happen next, and indeed when the next general election might be. After all, my professional background wasn't in politics, it was in policing, people management and whisky. But it turns out in your role as Chief Whip, all three of them come in quite handy. Now, if you're one of the people I've had the chance to speak to back then, perhaps it was over a late night drink at the conference bar, I am certain there is one thing you would have heard me say about our prospects in North East Fife. It's the most marginal seat in the UK. Just 2 votes in it. 2 votes separating the Lib Dems from the SNP. Now, I know what you're all thinking. What a bar chart. And I can assure you, because I have the evidence here, that there was a pixel differentiation on that bar chart. But were we complacent? No, we were not. We worked really bloody hard in the rain, in the wind, in the dark. And we were able to turn that 2-vote SNP majority into an orange North East Fife again. So, conference, with that in mind today, I am here to challenge you. What are you going to do in the next year to put more orange onto the map? Because let me tell you, ambition is one thing, but without hard work, without bundling leaflets late at night, doing delivery walks in the cold, pounding the pavements in the pouring rain, without all of that, we are never going to kick this Conservative government out of office. And it isn't just about the Tories. I suspect you all expected me to say that. We have seen scandal and failure in the SNP's Scottish Government, as much as in the Conservative one. And the Lib Dems' most marginal seat is in the UK, is in mid-Dumbartonshire. It might not be 2 votes, but 149 is still pretty close. The SNP decline in standards needs to be arrested. So we will get out there and show the SNP that we will do that. So, conference, I urge you, find the nearest place where we're hoping to win a seat, whether it's mid-Dumbartonshire or mid-Bedfordshire. Go and get involved, sign up to do a delivery round, join a marathon, write blue letter envelopes, get on to Connect. Because it's a fantastic opportunity, a pivotal election in which to make a change and to help bring about a real difference for your local community and for the country. Now, hard work is exactly how we won 4 stonking by-election victories in this Parliament. And I mentioned it's my first autumn conference as an MP. Well, it's theirs too. And conference, let me tell you, in less than a month, I'm going to have a 5th new colleague to whip when Emma Holland-Lindsay beats the Conservatives in mid-Bedfordshire. Now, I can't mention the by-elections without talking about one of the key reasons that we were able to persuade lifelong Conservative voters in North Shropshire or in Tiverton or in Somerton that they should support us. And that's the complete erosion of standards under this Conservative government. And Conference, Liberal Democrats aren't just content with criticising these scandals when they happen. We're in Parliament trying to put things right. And one of the first big scandals was directly responsible for the North Shropshire by-election, and that was Owen Paterson. He broke the rules, but Conservative MPs trudged through the voting lobbies and let him off the hook. What an outrage! So I wrote to the Speaker, and we secured an emergency debate on standards in Parliament. And thankfully, in the end, Owen Paterson did the right thing and resigned his seat in North Shropshire. And we all know what happened in the by-election that followed. Don't we, Helen? But I wasn't done there. Owen Paterson had voted to let himself off. In fact, any MP who was subject to any sort of standards motion, even for absolutely disgraceful behaviour, could vote in relation to their own sanction. This is so obviously wrong. MPs as both the accused and the jury. So over the course of the year, I worked to build up a cross-party consensus that the rules should be reformed. And when the opportunity came, I tabled an amendment to prevent this from happening in future. And I'm pleased to say, Conference, that we got it passed. We changed the rules. And that's the difference that having Liberal Democrat MPs in Parliament can make. Conservatives voted to ignore the rules. Liberal Democrats made sure they were reformed. Conservatives trashed standards in public life, and Liberal Democrats are trying to put things right. So, Conference, what next? Something seems to me deeply wrong in the way that Conservative MPs have continued to receive handouts for their failure. It's like an incentive for chaos. The rapid turnover of ministers that we have seen means that so many initiatives are just simply not getting done, be it the unbuilt hospitals, the missing renters reforms, or the ban on conversion therapy. And I still find it unbelievable that when a cabinet minister resigns, they are entitled to almost £17,000 in severance payments, with almost no exceptions. If you resign in scandal, still entitled to it. Only been in post for a day, you still get the payout. If you get reappointed at least 3 weeks after you were sacked, you can claim the cash. Now, I suppose it probably never occurred to whoever wrote the rules that it was even possible to make the kind of absolute mess that the Conservatives have created of late. Because, of course, in a year of 3 Prime Ministers, which also saw half the government resign in July 2022, the payouts have gone up and up and up. Conservative MPs have cashed in on the chaos that they have created. And while families struggle to pay their bills and put food on their table, their taxes are going to pay off former ministers and indeed former Prime Ministers such as Liz Truss. Her £18,000 severance payment could have been used to pay for 26,500 lettuces. And of course, that's fewer lettuces than you could have bought last year, thanks to the way that she trashed the economy. Conference, seriously, enough is enough, and that's why I'm unveiling new proposals today to reform the ministerial severance rules. We will ensure that only ministers who have served for a reasonable period of time are given any kind of payout, with a more substantial break clause to prevent those who are reappointed a couple of months after they are sacked from pocketing thousands of pounds of taxpayers' cash. And most importantly, we will ensure that Conservative MPs who resign or are sacked in disgrace because they broke the ministerial code, such as Gavin Williamson or Dominic Raab, are not eligible for a payout at all. And Conference, I do want to touch on Dominic Raab in particular, because there is one image which really encapsulates that Conservative cocktail of arrogance, incompetence and heartlessness during the course of the past 4 years. And it's from the summer of 2021, 2 years ago. And that's the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. Whilst those Afghans who put their lives on the line to support our troops found themselves targets, and while Afghan women found their hard-won freedoms snatched away overnight, where was Dominic Raab? Conference, he was relaxing on the beach, not a care in the world. Doesn't that sum it up? And Conference, I know I'm not the only one who found those scenes in Afghanistan 2 years ago deeply upsetting. And they moved me to help set up a cross-party group in Parliament advocating for Afghan women and girls, of which I'm proud to say I'm a co-chair. Making sure the voices of Afghan women, both here and in their own country, are heard in the places where decisions about their lives, their very ability to exist, are being made. And it's slow, but it is happening. The truth is that our country made promises to the people of Afghanistan, and those promises have not been kept. And maybe it's the rapid turnover of ministers. Maybe it's the fact that the Conservative government simply hasn't been up to the task. Or maybe it's because they just don't care. But whatever it is, the fact remains. What do we stand for if we don't stand up for the most basic human rights of our fellow human beings? Fairness, equality, and the right to a fulfilling life. Without question, the UK government should stand for those things. But far too frequently, this Conservative government either doesn't care or doesn't get it. Now, one group that has been particularly neglected is carers. And in the words of the Carers Trust survey report published recently, unpaid carers are not unsung heroes. We are forgotten, we are neglected, we are burnt out. And I know this from the carers in North East Fife, that they are undervalued, that they do not have adequate support, and that they struggle to balance caring responsibilities and work. So I was determined to change the law and to make life better for them. And so, Conference, earlier this year, I'm proud to say I took the Carers Leave Bill through Parliament, and I'm happy to say it's now the Carers Leave Act. And as a result, more than 2.4 million people across the UK who are currently balancing caring with work will now benefit from a statutory right to take 5 days of unpaid care a year to help them better balance those work and caring responsibilities. And that's a benefit that the millions that follow them will also have. It's the Liberal Democrats who stand up for carers when they are being taken for granted by this Conservative government. Just like we stand up for the Afghans who the government has turned into an afterthought, and how we stand up for standards in public life and for our democratic institutions when Conservatives like Lee Anderson, Suella Braverman and Jacob Rees-Mogg, yeah, more booing, seek to undermine them. Conference, this is the difference when we get Liberal Democrats elected. We do not take voters for granted. We work hard to win our seats. We work hard to represent our local communities, and we work hard day in and day out making a difference in this country. I am so proud of what I've been able to achieve since I was elected, but it is all thanks to you. It's thanks to every single member who came door knocking or delivering or phoning for me in the depths of winter 2019. Just think how much more we can achieve when we elect a whole host of new Liberal Democrat MPs at the next election. Each seat we take from the SNP means one less MP who will vote to break up the UK and one more who will stand up for it and make the changes that the UK needs to prosper. And each seat we take off the Conservatives means one less MP who will vote to break the rules and one more who will stand up for them. One less who will vote to break our promises to the most vulnerable, and one more who believes that making the most for our vulnerable people and making them better off is fundamental. One less who will be there under a Conservative manifesto, and one more who will advocate for the policies that we've been debating here in the last few days. So, Conference, let's get out there. This year is going to mean a lot more bloody hard work. But if we work hard, think of what we will achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Good afternoon, Conference, and welcome to F33, which you will find on page 87 of the standard printed agenda, and under F33 on the app. There is a slight change because summation will be by Dr. Julie Smith, and there are 2 amendments which you can find on page 11 of Conference Daily. May I ask all our speakers to keep to time, because we are starting slightly late, and stand by. I now ask Michael Wang from Brighton and Hove to stand by, and I call Richard Ford, MP from Tiverton and Homerton, to move the motion.
Conference, I thought we had left behind state-on-state conflict. I thought we had left behind in Europe in the last century the idea that big countries might try to gobble up their smaller neighbours. Cast your mind back to your first instinct last year on the 24th of February, when you heard that Russia was rolling its armour towards Kyiv. First we were dumbfounded, then we were outraged. But now there is just too much familiarity with the all too dreadful daily news about the brutality that is being perpetrated by bullies in the Kremlin on the people of Ukraine. Kira, we had the privilege earlier of hearing from you about the bravery of yourself and other MPs and the civilians and those people who are serving in Ukraine. It is a privilege to have you with us at this conference. Thank you. It's become a cliché for politicians to refer to Putin's illegal invasion. But Russia has ignored the UN Charter in relation to sovereignty and territorial integrity. Acts of aggression dating back to last February constitute what the Nuremberg trials called aggression, the supreme international crime. Bluntly, the videos, the disgusting, despicable videos of Ukrainian soldiers being beheaded while still alive, they link back to the original aggression perpetrated by Putin and by the Kremlin. And it is this crime of aggression from which other international crimes flow, such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. There may be 1 or 2 individuals in this room who feel uncomfortable about the consensus that exists between all of the British political parties when it comes to endorsing military action or supplying arms, because traditionally we in the Liberal Democrats have always been very sceptical about such things as the invasion of Iraq in 2003. We were right to be sceptical about that invasion. NATO expansion. Don't believe that rubbish that is being put out by the Kremlin. Suggest to people in Estonia that accession to NATO is somehow about NATO expansion. People in Estonia can thank NATO for its security today. By contrast, think of the people in Georgia, people in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, who have a bleak future thanks to the separatism that has been stoked by Moscow. Hope for people in Ukraine is self-determination. As liberals, any idea in the Kremlin of an empire encroaching on Kyiv from Washington or from Brussels is about. Russia is seeing the world through its own expansionist imperial lens, and it would do very well to abandon that. Last September, I visited Ukraine. I visited Hostomel Airport. Was the defense of that airport. How courageous the men and women were who defended Ukraine. It was, during my visit, it was last September. It was the week of the liberation of 6,000 square kilometers in the Kharkiv region. And I can remember well the jubilation on the streets of Kyiv. Bear in mind, this also happened at a pretty unusual time. It was in the week of the sad death of Her Majesty the late Queen. And it was in the same week that Liz Truss replaced Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. So you'll appreciate that for a British Liberal Democrat in Ukraine, it was a time of mixed emotions. But the leadership of the late Queen, and specifically of President Zelensky, sat very uncomfortably with the new leadership under Prime Minister Truss. I've read Amendment 1 and Amendment 2, and I think it's very noble that we should be both recognising that proscription of Wagner happened too late, but also recognising that we can go a lot further to defend and support those Russians who are brave enough to speak out against this illegal war. When he was alive, many of us in the party used to listen carefully to the perspective on global events of Paddy Ashdown. It was always humane and very well thought through. And Paddy's response in 2015 to the invasion of Crimea that had happened the year before is still very illuminating to look back on. Paddy wrote at the time, "The correct response to the Russian arming of the Ukrainian rebels is to make it clear that we are prepared to do the same for the Ukrainian government. Not now, not quickly, and not all at once. But what we need is a process rather than an event. Start small, start slow, be unaggressive, but expand by steps when we need to." Conference, expanding by steps is what we needed to do, and it's exactly what we have done. For Ukraine, this is a just war. Nearly 10,000 civilians have been killed there since the full-scale invasion last year. Ukraine is fighting a war of national survival. It's fighting in its own self-defense. There are plenty of people in Europe who recognize that Ukraine is fighting in their defense too. And those of us who value liberty, who value democracy, we as well must recognize that Ukraine is fighting for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I call Michael Wang, who is the mover of Amendment 1 from Brighton and Hove, and I ask Jeremy Lord Purvis of Tweed to stand by.
Conference. It's great to speak to you again today, and Kira, absolute privilege to have you here. I want to tell you the story of Sasha Skenchelenko, whom I met briefly during my study abroad in Russia. Sasha is an artist and a musician. She penned a comic book about depression, chronicling her own battle with mental health, with the aim of destigmatizing the issue in Russia. In the weeks following the invasion, Sasha felt she had to act according to her conscience. She replaced several price tags in a local store with messages that spelled out the truth about the war. Here are some of the price tags she designed herself. This one in particular, translated roughly, says that 80% of Mariupol has been destroyed by the Russian army. 10 days later, Sasha was arrested and charged with the offense of public dissemination of knowingly false information about the use of the armed forces. Knowingly false in this context, of course, means anything that contradicted the official narrative. If convicted, she faces up to 10 years in prison. As of today, Sasha has spent more than 500 days in incarceration. She suffers from celiac disease, but was not provided with an adequate gluten-free diet, causing constant stomach pain and vomiting. Requests for bail or house arrest have been denied. Yet, she has refused to take part in any plea deal, stating that she will serve all 10 years behind bar if that is the cost of truth. She is without doubt the bravest individual that I've known. This is the story of Sasha, but her story is not singular. Indeed, Amnesty International estimates that more than 21,000 people face heavy reprisals in Russia for their anti-war opinions and activities. These include students, artists, academics, priests, politicians, pensioners, veterans, ordinary citizens from all walks of life. Conference, we must be unwavering in our support of Ukraine. At the same time, I implore you not to forget the many courageous people in Russia still fighting for the fate of their country. The world needs a liberal Russia. If we do nothing, Once Putin is gone, another despot would almost certainly take his place. Another Putin, or worse, another Prigozhin. And Russia, lest we forget, is the country with the biggest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world. As Kira told us earlier today, we must ensure this war never happens again. Now is the critical moment. I think of the surreal pictures of Putin shaking hands with Kim Jong-un, sharing the enthusiasm for what they call the sacred war. A moment's hesitation from the defenders of liberalism and democracy, and I'm afraid it might be too late. At the same time, some anti-war activists in Russia have managed to evade capture. What if they wanted to continue their work in safety in the UK? Their application for ordinary visa will certainly be denied. They could risk their life in a small boat, only to be detained on arrival, prohibited from working, and if the government got their way, removed to Rwanda. Conference, we're an internationalist party. We must work ceaselessly to fight against oppression anywhere and everywhere it occurs in the world. That's why I'm so proud to move this amendment, and I asked for its support. Glory to Ukraine, freedom to Russia.
Thank you, Michael. I ask Ulina Kushnarenko to stand by, and I call Jeremy Purvis.
Kira, it's a real pleasure to see you here. You really were so instrumental in our Scottish conference last year for ensuring that our Scottish party understood directly the consequences of how the people of Ukraine are suffering from Putin's aggression. Conference, as a Scottish Liberal Democrat and as the House of Lords spokesman for foreign affairs and international development, it's a real privileged position that I have to try and secure what are liberal measures in times of crisis. And I'm, as a Scottish Liberal, you'd not be surprised to hear that I'm also privileged to be in the mould of David Steele and Russell Johnson and Charles Kennedy and Ming Campbell, who have made sure that our party is an internationalist party. And Ming, it's a real pleasure to see you, and thank you for everything you've done to make sure that our party is an international movement. Last February, on the week of the aggression that Richard described, I was in Baghdad and then I went to Beirut. And I knew that the consequences of Putin's aggression, the ripples would be far wider than simply the borders of Ukraine. And I knew then, and when I came back to the House of Lords, I warned that there would be a weaponization of food and fertilizer. And the consequences of that would be direct on the people who can least afford it in the east of Africa with famine and with hunger. And then a month later, I was in Sudan. And in frequent visits to Sudan, leading to my last visit at the end of March, where I met with Generals Burhan and Hemeti in a last-ditch appeal for some civilian governance within the country before the war, I had seen with my own eyes another element of the export of Putin's regime, and that was the contracting out of terror through the Wagner group. I have seen the Wagner operatives in Khartoum. I have seen how they've operated. And that led me to be the first in Parliament, on behalf of our party, to call for that group to be proscribed as a terrorist organisation. I was a lone voice, but then that voice became louder when I was followed. I did it last April, and I did it every single month in Parliament since, and I have done so repeatedly this year. And ultimately, Conference, that led to the Wagner Group being proscribed by the British government. So when you are in Parliament as a Liberal representative, we are not thinking theoretical. We want to put what we believe in practice. So we accept the government has done what we've asked them to do, but it doesn't stop here. And that is why our amendment and the motion, quite rightly, make sure that we need to restore the 0.7% commitment, which Michael Moore and I had the real privilege of taking through Parliament. And we need to ensure that our support for the people of countries like Sudan that have been victims of the export of terror by Putin, as well as the absolutely rock-solid support for the people of Ukraine, we are united. As a liberal movement, we will not rest. There is more injustice created by Putin's regime, and we will continue to act. So any activist Go back to your areas and ensure that we are campaigning for the people who are the victims in Ukraine and the victims across Africa of the countries that who've been suffering because of Putin's regime. Thank you.
I ask Ian Stokesbury to stand by, and I call Alina Krishnarenko. Alina lives in Yeovil, and unusually we have two Ukrainian speakers who have requested to speak. They're not party members, but it is within the purview of the FCC committee to allow it when the decision is made. So, Alina.
Hello, conference. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I was informed I have 3 minutes. I'll speak for 2, and then let's have a moment of silence for the Ukrainians and the British who died in Ukraine because of war. I am Ukrainian. Day after day, our brave heroes stand up to defend Ukraine. They defend democratic values. Being here at this conference for 3 days, it warms my heart to realize that Ukraine is not alone. Everyone says their voice, Ukraine, is the voice of democratic countries against autocracy. Thank you. Every day, people in Ukraine now to get sleep and not knowing if they will wake up. Last night, Ukraine was massively attacked by missiles and drones, again and again. Your military aid has set millions of lives today already. Please continue to stay with us and help us to defend Ukraine. I am Ukrainian mother. I have 3 young children, 2 daughters and son. My home was in Irpin. It was occupied for more than a month. A missile destroyed my house. My lovely garden was totally bombed and mined. When the war began, I took my 3 young children and went west. My neighbor chose to stay. He stepped outside and was shot near his house. His body lay in our street more than a week. Other neighbors were too afraid to retrieve him. And now I'm here. I am deeply grateful for the British people who opened their hearts and homes. You saved the lives of thousands of children. You give us home of hope. You provide our children with education for the future defense of democracy. But our visa is ending soon, and I ask to continue, please. You continue to help our children for the future from schools and education, because it's investment in knowledge. I ask to continue military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine and Ukrainians. Thank you. I ask everyone for a moment of silence of honor the memory of those who died in this war, the Ukrainians, the British, who bravely died protecting democracy. Glory to Ukraine, glory to Britain. Слава Україні! Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. I call Ian Stokesbury and ask Tom Sutton to stand by, please.
Conference, I think that deserves another round of applause, don't you? Conference, I want to also talk about how important it is to reaffirm our commitment to the 0.7%. My wife and I are in a position where we are able and have been overjoyed to welcome Ukrainian guests into our home, and it has been incredible. However, some refugees around the world are not so lucky. We are proudly standing alongside Ukraine, but Britain's liberal values should never be in question. We need to make sure that that liberal position and liberal voice is heard at every corner. Richard, thank you so much for articulating our vision. It's so important. Thank you so very much. I am really proud of what our government has done in protecting Ukraine, in supplying munitions, and indeed being some of the first to supply training and munition support. But I'm equally ashamed of the rhetoric around asylum and around refugees. This party is absolutely unwavering in its support for refugees and asylum seekers. And this motion helps us to reaffirm that and make it loud and proud. Thank you very much, so much, and indeed, Kira, for all your words. Slava Ukraini, and please support this motion conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I call Tom Sutton from Lancaster and Morecambe, who is chair of the North West Young Liberals, and I ask John Sweeney from Lambeth to stand by, please.
Thank you, Conference. I'm a first-time speaker. 2 weeks ago, stood in the European Solidarity Centre in Gdansk, something was confirmed to me. When talking about Central and Eastern Europe, it's worth remembering that Lech Wałęsa did not climb the shipyard fence, nor did Václav Havel write his essays, and neither did the Baltics sing, just so the thumb of Moscow could oppress once more. We were warned after the 2005 Orange Revolution in Ukraine and the 2008 South Ossetian War in Georgia that this was a Kremlin that only knew the taste of corruption and blood, but it fell on deaf ears. We were warned post-2013, after the annexation of Crimea, civil war in the Donbass, and needless deaths of MH17 victims, but our weak response fell on the Kremlin's ignorant ears as realpolitik took centre stage. It sadly took a full invasion to make us see sense. And what have we seen since? Mariupol razed to the ground, millions displaced and countless murdered. Let us call it for what it is. Ethnic cleansing from a fascist regime obsessed with history, but seemingly incapable of grasping the reality of Russia's decline. So they make the neighbours pay in fire, blood and anguish. Our friends in Poland and the Baltic states warned us that without NATO, they would be next. We did not listen. We should commend actions taken so far to rid the UK of dirty Russian money. But why were we here in the first place after the Litvinenko case and the Salisbury poisonings? In addition to their global atrocities as well. So what should we do? We shall not rest. We shall not rest until Ukraine's decisive unconditional victory, and we shall not rest until Ukraine is welcomed into the EU and NATO and supported in its recovery to become the burgeoning democracy it aspires to be. And we shall not rest until Putin and others have their day in The Hague to answer for what they have done. Conference, Liberals, Ukraine has made our privilege clear that our liberal values are not something that we have had to fight for in battle in recent time. We cannot let them down. I urge you all to back this motion. Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, glory to Ukraine and glory to their valiant heroes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. May I ask Paul Zukowski to stand by, and I call John Sweeney.
Conference, I'm a first-time speaker. I've got 3 minutes. Actually, we've all got 3 minutes. The monster in the Kremlin has given the order, and the cruise missile has been launched from the submarine in the Black Sea, and it's coming our way. My friend Victoria Amelina was a writer, and she became a human rights investigator when the big war started. She made it her passion to find families who had suffered loss thanks to the Russian killing machine and to talk to them so that no one would lose somebody without being listened to. And there was a children's poet in Izium, and he'd written a diary about the Russian occupation, and he knew the Russians were onto him. And the day before the Russians disappeared him for good, he buried his diary in the garden near a cherry tree. Victoria went to see his father, and they talked for hours. And just as she was going, he said, oh, by the way, he had a diary, and he buried it in the garden by the cherry tree. Victoria said, Okay, they get out the spade. And they try and they dig and they dig and they dig and they keep on missing it. And eventually, one last time, Victoria finds the cherry tree, finds the diary by the cherry tree, and publishes his story from beyond the grave of what it's like to live under Russian occupation. The cruise missile is on its way. We've got 2 minutes. Victoria is eating a pizza in the rear pizza restaurant, Kramatorsk, this June. Driven there by my normal fixer, Dima, with a party of South American journalists. She's explaining to them the nature of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. I'm going to read a poem she wrote. It's called Sirens. Air raid sirens across the country. It feels like everyone is brought out for execution, but only one person gets targeted, usually the one at the edge. This time, not you. All clear. She was killed. This war is real. This war is a fight between good and evil. And we must be on the side of the good of Ukraine. And I am worried about the Conservative Party. In the 1930s, the Conservatives appeased Adolf Hitler. In the 2000s, they have appeased Vladimir Putin. And the people who are paying in blood the price of the Conservatives' greed and timidity are the Ukrainians. We must stand by Ukraine. Thank you.
I'll ask Kira Riddick to stand by and now call Paul Zakowski, leader of Welling and Hatfield Borough Council.
Conference. I'm not quite sure how you follow John Sweeney. It's good to see you again. Conference, my father was from the Ukraine, and I've had a link with Ukraine ever since. He was a really interesting chap who was probably the most pig-headed and bullish person I've ever met. And when I went to Ukraine, I found a country full of them. They won't give up, and we should stand by them and make sure that they don't have to. I'm convinced that Ukraine will win. It might be next year, it might be in 10 years' time, but it will prevail. It will prevail. The people I met there when I went to Ukraine will not give up. And I've been 4 times since the war started. I've taken tons of aid to Ukraine. I'm really proud of my record of doing that and that contribution that I made. And I wish I could do more. It's difficult to do that. But as a country, we need to do the same. And we are doing that. We are contributing. But it shouldn't be at the cost of those other refugees around the world and the 0.7% target. What we should be doing for Ukraine should be on top of that. Because the people in Morocco, the people in Libya need our help too. There's no question in my mind that we need to help them too. I'm here to say that I support Ukraine. I'm so pleased that my country as a whole supports Ukraine. They need our support. The rest of the world needs that support too. Slava Ukraini.
I'll ask Vince Cable to stand by and now call Kira Riddick, Vice President of ALDE Party and leader of Holos in the Ukrainian Parliament.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I was truly impressed, and thank you so much for all the previous speakers. You were so amazing, and honestly, every word was touching me deeply. It's very hard to make up something new since I was speaking, so I will be just telling you how my day went up until this time. So after I finished my speech, I got a call from my mom, and she said, "So what is exactly that you're doing there?" And I said, Mom, I'm actually trying to embrace and get in all the love, so then I can bring it to Ukraine and share it with my people. And believe me, there is so much love to get in. Then I was working at this fantastic bank and looking at the sea. And my another friend called me, the one that was owning the hotel that was bombarded at night in Odessa. Also a city alongside the sea that is so beautiful, and Bournemouth reminds me of it a lot. He was telling that he will rebuild the hotel, and that there would be an enormous amount of money that we would need for the rebuild, and that every single day after every single attack, the amount of money increased. So then I thought that it would be a good opportunity to remind you about a dear project of mine and Bill Browder, and thank you Laila Moran for supporting it, and so many others. It is confiscating of Russian seized assets. As you know, right now, there are $500 billion of Russian money that are being stored in the democratic countries. Nothing happens with them. Meanwhile, all of you are paying out of pockets to support us, which we are tremendously grateful for, but it is so unfair that is happening. It would be so logic to take Russian money and to use them for rebuild of Ukraine. And this is why I'm calling for all Lib Dems MPs to continue pushing it through in the British Parliament. So that would happen. Canada has passed the legislation, US have passed the legislation. Now it is time for the United Kingdom to do that, and then to act on it. And then I was talking to journalists, and I was able to share some of the thoughts with them. And they were asking me again about Africa. And I truly believe that, especially when, we see all that happening in Morocco and recent earthquake in Turkey, you're looking at all the suffering and you're thinking, well, this is what we as a humanity should be fighting against. This is where we need our support, our forces, our energy against something that we cannot control. When the war happens, it happens between humans, and it is so incredibly unfair, especially that we do have issues to tackle. We have hunger that the war has a huge impact on. By the way, you know that before the full-scale invasion started, Ukraine was the world's top 5 producer of the wheat, barley, sunflower oil, tomatoes, and corn. But which one of those you don't like? And now 20% of our territory, 20%, can you imagine that, is a landmine. And with the pace that is being demined right now, it would take 700 years. I jog every day, but I don't have hopes to live that long. But it is incredible what we will have to put just to get rid of something that is already being done by our enemy. And then I had a brief talk with our Ukrainian community that is really so warm to my heart. And they wanted me to remind you that there are things that can be done, political things, organizational things, like prolonging the visas and making sure that the children that are studying, they have the security of knowing how their future will continue, that there is no fear that they will be kicked out. I'm sure they will not be. But it would be good to know in advance that they are safe here and they can plan, really plan ahead. And then there was the best call. My friend, Colonel, he called me. He is at the Kherson region fighting at the front. And he asked me where am I, and I told him that that I'm right now in the United Kingdom, and he wanted me to thank you for all the weapons that they received because they are putting it for good use. He also told me, if I remember, and I don't know if you have seen it, but it was like widely popular in Ukraine, a video from the British bar where many lads are singing, "Kerch Bridge is on fire, your defense is terrified." Have you seen that? Oh, well, it was like incredibly popular, and we were very happy that you take the victories so close to your hearts. So he told me a secret thing. He said, well, tell them to get ready to sing.
Thank you,
Thank
Kira.
you so much.
I ask Tony Patterson to stand by, and I now call Sir Vince Cable from Twickenham and Richmond.
Conference, I felt humbled, as I think we all did, by Kira's speech and by the personal testimony we heard this afternoon. I was just add a note, having been in Kyiv last week, and I was privileged to meet some of the very impressive people around President Zelensky, but also some of the victims of the war. Women whose partners are in POW camps, some of the people who've been bombed and shelled in towns like Irpin, where the Russians were very systematically targeting civilian accommodation, and some of the people who'd got out of the occupied areas where atrocities have been committed and apparently are still being committed to this day. And I was given one very powerful message, that what the Ukrainians are afraid of is not the Russians, because they're beating the Russians. What they're afraid of is war fatigue amongst their allies, boredom, distraction, losing interest. I mean, they have been fighting this occupation for 8 years, and the war will continue weeks, months, maybe years, and they will need continued support through that time. And a lot of the support is economic, because their economy has been destroyed. I mean, Kyiv is a remarkably functioning, busy, successful city, but the economy has been destroyed. The Russians are destroying the infrastructure, and it's going to be replaced. And the irony is we're sitting on billions of Russian assets, foreign exchange reserves, oligarch assets, and the Russians are trashing every law in the book, but we're following due legal process, and the assets are not being used, and that's not good enough. So just a very simple message which Richard gave, which is the Ukrainians are fighting, we must stand with them, but they're not just fighting for their own country and themselves, they're fighting for us, and we should remember that. Thank you.
I ask Dr. Julie Smith, Baroness Smith of Newnham, to stand by, and I call Councillor Tony Patterson from Twickenham and Richmond, and also Lib Dem Friends of Ukraine.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm Councillor Tony Patterson, and luckily this is our motion, as it's from Richmond, where I'm a councillor, and I've also just had the honour to become the chair of Liberal Democrat Friends of Ukraine, a new affiliated organisation, and we're really happy about that. Thank you. So it's wonderful to have Kira Rudik here. So moving listening to Elena. A really rousing speech from Richard Ford. And it's the point is, this is not morally ambiguous, what we're talking about here. It's not like Iraq or Afghanistan. What we're up against is a warmonger, as it rightly says in the motion, a warmonger, Putin, who ultimately is a threat to the West. We are the party of Paddy Ashdown. And in this context, what we need is muscular liberalism, appealing to the whole centre vote. We shouldn't just be appealing to the centre left. Lib Dem should appeal to the whole centre vote. And sending heavy weapons, encouraging the government to do more to send heavy weapons to Ukraine and all the other support, ammunition, training and so on, is absolutely vital. And our values are of importance here. I don't think the Lib Dems sort of recognise the importance of values. I think if we promoted those more, we would be higher in the polls and we would do better in general elections. People understand those sometimes better than policies. So what are the relevant values in the context we're talking about? First of all, our internationalism. Secondly, promoting European democracy and collaboration, but also our love of our country. Maybe not often of the sort of showy last night of the proms variety, but in Richmond, we had more Jubilee parties last year than any other borough in the country, and we had many coronation parties this year, and that sort of love of country is very much our Lib Dem thing. And on top of that, the liberty, and that really is the overarching thing, isn't it? We're liberals, and liberalism, the lesson of the last 10 years, is without heavy power to support it, it's not tenable. And that liberty appeals very much to young liberals, both with a big L and a small l, but to all of us. And I just want to finish. I had the good luck recently to meet Andrei Kurkov, who's said to be, and I think, not that I've made many Ukrainian books, but I read Grey Bees by him, and it's absolutely brilliant. Anyway, so we had a literary lunch in Richmond about 3 weeks ago, where I met him, and I asked him if he would be willing to write a message to this conference. And in fact, he just did it. He's on his way from Bologna to Milan, promoting his books, and he's on his way to Toronto after that. And he sent me an email on Thursday, and this is what he said to you. He said, Ukrainians are very grateful to Great Britain for military and humanitarian assistance. Unfortunately, the war continues and a second winter is ahead, during which Russia will again try to destroy the infrastructure of Ukrainian cities and villages. We really look forward to your continued help. The war is between the past and the future future cannot lose. So please support this motion and the 2 amendments. Please, if you're willing, join Liberal Democrat Friends of Ukraine. We'd love to see you at a social event to meet Ukrainians at 6:15 in the Marriott Hotel this evening. Ukraine, we love you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I now call Baroness Smith, who is our defence spoke in the Lords, to summate the amended motion.
Friends, it's about freedom. That was the slogan that the Liberal Democrats used several years ago as our party manifesto. What better slogan could we have now in standing up for our friends from Ukraine? This has been the most powerful and emotional debate that I have witnessed at conference over 30 years. To hear the personal testimony of Elena, of Kira, of Paul, telling us about the experiences in Ukraine, the reception in Yeovil, taking support back to Ukraine, and hearing that the Ukrainians are, and I hope not being a Ukrainian, you won't take this amiss, that the Ukrainians are pig-headed and they will not give up. Fellow Liberal Democrats, we must not give up either. As Richard said in opening this debate, we didn't expect war in Europe. In many ways, as Liberals, we expected that peace in Europe had come about 60 years ago, that we would never need to go to war in this continent. But Ukraine's war is our war. Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine threatens democracy in Europe. It threatens the values that we all stand for. And it is absolutely right that we stand up with Ukraine, that we continue to support the government. It's a rare thing for me to say to support the government, but on this, we must support the government in sending military support to Ukraine. but where, as we've heard from Vince Cable and others, we need to be opposing the government and the Conservative Party. We mustn't be bankrolling Russian oligarchs. We must make sure that Russian money is closed down. We need to be above that. We need to make sure that Russia does not have the resources to be continuing this war. My colleague Jeremy Purvis spoke about his commitment to ensuring that the Wagner Group was proscribed. It finally has been, but not before we've seen its actions not just in Ukraine, not just in Europe, but also in Africa. Ukraine's war is our war. We need all to be standing up for democracy and making sure that Putin realizes he cannot win. For too long, we turned a blind eye, and Tom, in his first speech at conference, reminded us of 2005, Georgia 2008, Crimea 2014. We mustn't ever turn a blind eye again. The situation in the Western Balkans reminds us of that. The grain issues, the lack of grain in the Horn of Africa reminds us of that. We, as Liberal Democrats, must stand with Ukraine. We must ensure that the government does the right thing. There must be a special tribunal to hold Vladimir Putin and others to account for questions of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. This is not just Ukraine's war. Your war is our war. You are defending peace and democracy. We stand with you. Fellow Liberal Democrats, please support this motion. Please support the amendments. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you, Julie. We will now move to a vote on the amended motion. So may I see everybody's hands in favour of the motion? The amended motion, that is. There were no contestations against the amendment, so it is the amended motion. Thank you. And may I see any votes against? Thank you. That looks like in the room. We will just wait a few seconds to let everybody's vote should be equal and everyone should count the same. We'll just let them. Just refreshing. Yep. Yes, it's unanimously carried. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you to my aide, Nick DeCosta, and to Hall aide, Paul McGarry. We now hand over to Chris Adams, Chair of F34 on standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Conference. We are now going to move to the debate on F34, Standing Order Amendment on Speaker Card Selection. Now, I know that everyone was really excited by the last debate, but you are even more enthused by this debate because, of course, you are Liberal Democrats. For those who are perhaps questionably Liberal Democrat, can you please leave the hall? And quietly, those who are leaving can leave the hall quietly, please. I would like to ask David Barnsdale to please come and propose the motion and Prue Bray to stand by. Thank you.
What we decide through and vote through at conference matters. The policies we advocate may, in future, be put into action, so it's important that we get them right. That requires we hear at least some argument against. It matters first because the removers of the motion might be wrong. A group of members of like mind in their bubble may miss a key objection to what they propose, and conference could make a serious mistake unless it is ensured that a dissenter has the chance to put before conference a counter-argument. But let us, for sake of argument, that we are sure that the motion is correct. We can never be 100% sure, but let's take it for sake of argument. It is still important to hear someone speak against. It is through encountering objections and refuting them that we strengthen what we believe in, and through this, deepen our understanding of the issues. Remember the words of the great liberal J.S. Mill. He who knows only his side of the case knows little of that. Isn't it better that we prepare ourselves for real-world debates by encountering counter-arguments early on? It's too late when we're confronted with opposing views on the doorstep. And debates where there is no speaker against are boring. That matters because we want people to attend conference and be engaged, and that should matter to everyone who is proposing a motion. Getting a motion passed is only half the battle for a policy. If members don't care about a motion, it will just lay there moribund. And a good debate, when the motion is adopted, could be key to building that support within the party. Now let's look at what our amendment replaces. The current wording relies on the Federal Committee knowing how things have always been done, and it is just possible to read what is done now into the current wording. But if it ever came to a complaint, there's no telling how it would be interpreted. It is imprecise. For example, it talks about attempting to provide a balanced debate between different viewpoints without giving any clues to what balance means. Is that 50-50, or proportionate, or something in between? Then it says the chairperson may announce a departure from this rule if there's an overwhelming preponderance of members wishing to speak on the same side. Is that a departure to be in favor of a minority, or does it mean that if the majority is large enough, the minority can be ignored altogether? This matters because an ordinary member just reading the standing orders should have some idea, without being told by somebody else, what those standing orders are going to mean in practice. Our proposed wording still leaves some discretion to the chairperson, but it makes it much clearer what conference expects from them. Central to this amendment is there should always be space for at least one speaker against. But it also specifies where in the order they will speak, so it will be obvious early on if something has gone awry, so someone can move a point of order to correct that. It will promote transparency in that the chairperson will always announce the number of speaker cards and on what size before a vote is taken. In the ideal world, everyone who wishes to speak would speak. However, what this motion aims for is the much more moderate aim of just one speaker against. That will enshrine in the standing orders the importance of debate in this sense. For a conference that truly values diverse views and clear guidelines, I urge you to vote for this amendment.
Thank you very much, David. I should have said at the start of this debate, I have had a motion to refer this back, which I'll be taking towards the end of the debate. Can I please ask Nick Da Costa to stand by, and I now call Prue Bray to speak against the Standing Order Amendment.
Good afternoon, Conference. There are only two legitimate reasons to change standing orders. One is to improve how a debate is conducted, and the other is to improve the quality of the debate. And these changes do neither. Take lines 26 to 30. The Chair is supposed to ensure at least one speaker for and against each motion and amendment, providing there are members willing and able to speak. How do you ensure there are speakers against if no one puts in a card? Do you have to ask for willing and able volunteers from the audience before you're allowed to move on? And how do you count people who want to support some bits and oppose others? Or people who say they oppose, but whose opposition consists of saying something doesn't go far enough? If this goes through, it will add a layer of complexity and create more opportunities for people to shout unfair if they are not called. So much for the practicality. What about the quality of the debate? The motion says there can be no genuine and meaningful debate unless opposing viewpoints are heard, even if one side may appear to be in a small minority. But current standing orders already allow opposing viewpoints to be heard and the opinions of small minorities to be represented. People who are in a small minority may want more airtime, but why should their views be given greater prominence than is justified by their numbers? Why should they be allowed to create the impression that they are a larger force than they are? Suppose the suggested changes went through and are then applied in a debate on climate change or vaccination. The Lib Dems would look like a party full of climate change deniers or anti-vaxxers, when nothing could be further from the truth. Our current standing orders say that the Chair's job is to provide a balanced debate while having the discretion to depart from that if circumstances suggest it. Where is the evidence that we cannot trust them to do that? I would also ask what the movers of the motion expect if their change goes through. Do they think that hearing more of what they disagree with will suddenly convince everyone to agree instead? And when that doesn't happen, what will they want next? I totally understand that people have views they want to push, but if the vast bulk of the party doesn't agree with them, then the vast bulk of the party doesn't agree with them, and they need to find a way to accept that. Minority views should be heard, but our system already allows for that. It works. We should stick with it. Please vote against this motion.
Thank you very much, Prue. Can I now please ask Jude Parker to stand by, and I call Nick Da Costa, Chair of Federal Conference Committee, to speak against the Standing Orders Amendment.
Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, Conference. You've seen me on stage enough today. Apologies for that. But the Federal Conference Committee formally opposes this Standing Order Amendment. Furthermore, with regards to the reference back, I urge you to vote against it because we don't want this to be referred back because it should just be defeated outright. There are significant concerns and issues with this amendment, and it appears that, unfortunately, the drafters do not understand what goes into managing a debate and chairing a debate. I'll give you an example of housing. I locked myself in the Chair's aid room from 11 o'clock onwards until 5 minutes before the debate, trying to get the balance right, going through all the speakers' cards, taking the time to read what people put on the back so that we can make sure we actually depart from strict proportionality. We can do that already. But the way it's worded, does that mean that in a case of a 10-person debate with 15 cards submitted, 10 for, 5 against, that we automatically called all 5 cards against the motion, even if they are, as many cards unfortunately are, pretty poor? Additionally, my biggest concern one of many of my concerns, but my biggest concern is it allows people to game the system. There is nothing stopping people from submitting empty cards just to sway one side of the argument. And as chair, we would be forced to read out those cards and create some fake theoretical balance of debate on that. And that's not dealt with, people gaming the system, and unfortunately people do. Additionally, what happens when someone submits a card that's against a motion, but they get up on stage and say, the motion's good but doesn't go far enough? I'm there as chair, scrabbling around the figures, trying to make it match up. And what happens when cards come in during the debate? We're then scrabbling away, spending more of our time to update our figures. But also, what's really important, conference, it's never just as simple as people saying, I'm for the motion, I'm against the motion, I'm for the amendment, I'm against the amendment. People say, I'm for lines 84 to 87, but I'm against the amendment, but I'm for the motion. I'm for this section, but against this section. I'm for this amendment, but against this amendment. I'll spend more of my time, and I think chairs will spend more of their time, reading out the different cards and how they balance about the parts of the motion people object to and agree with. Imagine on the pre-manifesto, we had 6 amendments. Someone's for the motion, against Amendment 1, for Amendment 2, against Amendment 3, for Amendment 4, against Amendment 5, for Amendment 6. I'm going to need a spreadsheet far too big to make it work. Please reject the Standing Orders Amendment and reject the reference back.
Thank you, Nick. Can I, after this speaker, I think we will move to a discussion around the reference back. I will explain that when I get there. But in the event that the initial vote on that fails, can I please ask Gareth Epps to stand by? And I now call Jade Parker.
Hello, conference. I'm sure we all remember 2016, a time when reporters would religiously ensure that they gave both sides equal time. An illusion of balance that pitted experts in their field against Nigel from down the pub, distorting the debate until, for much of the public, both sides seemed equally reasonable or unreasonable. I'm sure we're all pleased that conference doesn't insist balance has to mean each side gets equal time. FCC works hard to ensure we hear speakers from both sides of any given motion in a ratio as close as possible to the proportions of views submitted, as Nick just described. So what does that look like? Well, this motion has 25 minutes on the timetable. Subtract 5 minutes for the mover's speech and 3 for the summator. That leaves us with 17 minutes. I'm ignoring the time taken to vote for the sake of this. 3-minute speeches gives us time for 5.7 actual speakers on the motion, assuming there is 0 faff. I put it to you, conference, there will never be 0 faff. I've lost my place. Balance, therefore, could mean we got 80% for the motion, 20% against, so we called 1 speaker against the motion. And I'm sure if it was sort of 15%, they would include the 1 speaker against. But what if the card submitted on a particular view are outnumbered 20 to 1, 50 to 1, 100 to 1? This motion is asking us to distort our debates to the point where a minority view held by a little over 1 in 5 of those wishing to speak and a fringe view held by a single person are given the same weight. That is not reasonable or balanced. Conference, I urge you to vote against this motion.
Thank you very much, Jude. And Jude was a first-time speaker at conference, believe it or not. Great choice for a first motion to speak on. So, I am now going to read, I'm sure everyone here knows all the procedures because you wouldn't be here otherwise. I am now going to read the statement by Michael Kilpatrick, and then we are going to move to a vote on whether to hold a mini-debate on the reference back. You can either vote for that or against it. If you vote for it, then we will hold a mini-debate. I will call Michael Kilpatrick to make his case. I will then be calling Toby Keynes from the opposing side, and then we will have a vote on whether to refer it back. So the statement reads, F34 replaces the standing order with an extended word salad, which could instead be replaced with a solution allowing minority voices to be heard, but also allow FCC to make debates to be more flexible in a beneficial way. please allow the mini-debate to outline a proposal which FCC can consult on and implement later. So, that is the proposal. Can I please see all those in favour of having the mini-debate? And can I see all those against having the mini-debate? I should have said we did open the voting online, so I'll just check that now. Thank you very much, Conference. We are not going to have a mini-debate. That was clearly not carried. I know everyone is incredibly disappointed by that. Very commiserations to Michael. Right, so thank you, Gareth, for coming on stage. Can I also ask Jenny Rigg to please stand by? Thank you.
Conference, as Linda Jack once said, where to start? I rise to speak against this motion not because I don't support it, but because it doesn't go far enough. I didn't fill out my speaker's card fully because it would be obvious to the chair of the debate what I'm up to. But under our new standing orders, you, as the chair, are required to call people like me to speak. And by the way, I want to make a series of increasingly irrelevant points about Steve Coogan, motherhood and apple pie, octopi in Droitwich, and pubs. You saw what I did there. As a former conference chair, words like these, which I have heard before, make my heart sink, and I'm sure they make your heart sink too. If you vote through this standing orders amendment, be prepared to hear them in every debate, because the job of every conference chair to air all sides of the debate is already there, and it doesn't need to be micromanaged in a confused and contradictory way. Now let me let you into a couple of trade secrets of the Federal Conference Committee. Now I'm not bound by any collective responsibility. Conference chairs are scrutinised with statistics taken for every conference debate. If they do not reflect the balance of opinions for or against any particular amendment, as well as looking at the diversity in information about gender, ethnicity and other factors, they are called out. Some people try to game the system, of course, but those are very obvious, and chairs can stop people just sticking in a card against the motion so they can get called to speak in favour of it. This standing orders amendment would tie conferences' hands to the detriment of the debates that we had, like the fantastic debate we had this afternoon. I would love to know how a chair is supposed to ensure that there are speakers against a motion that's entirely uncontentious. The figures of those submitting cards for or against everything are already scrutinised, and chairs can cease and have ceased to be conference chairs if they depart from that. As others have said, this would be a bad thing to do, mostly because it would allow anyone to skew a debate for reasons that even they don't have to specify. Word salad is right. Conference, in my bathroom sits proudly a niche but fun book called The Time Waster Letters. I printed the text of this motion out so it can assume its rightful place, which is in that book. Let's keep it there.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Can I please ask Toby Keynes to please stand by to submit on the standing order amendment? And I now call Jenny Rigg to speak against the standing order amendment.
It's getting a bit worrying the number of times I'm following Gareth speaking on a procedural motion, but at least this time I am in agreement with Gareth and not against him. Conference, I want to delve deeper for you into what Nick said about gaming the system. Gaming the system is something that I do a lot. It's how I originally got onto FCC back in the late Neolithic era. The first half of this motion actually represents a reasonable approximation of how Speaker's card selection already works. But the meaty bit of the motion is a naked, transparent attempt to insert a new method for gaming the system. How would Speaker's card selection work if this motion was to pass? Well, people like me who like gaming the system would put in spurious Speaker's cards, not intending to be called at all, just to skew the numbers. Now, I don't know if this is an intended or an unintended effect on the part of the proposers of the motion, but if this passes, I will certainly be taking full advantage of it. I flatter myself that as a paid-up member of the establishment, I have a reasonable number of contacts. and you can bet your boots I will leverage that to the best of my ability. The problem is that now I've said that from the stage at conference, so will everybody else. And that would make the rest of FCC hate me, because we have enough on making sensible decisions about who to select without having to count bloody great thick piles of spurious cards to toss up numbers for a stupid willy-waving contest. And for that reason, I'd end up hating myself too. Please don't reference this back conference. Increase the sum total of happiness in the world by defeating it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I now call Toby Keynes to summate on the standing order amendment, and after that we'll move to a vote on whether to accept it or not. Toby.
Thank you, Chair. As we've been discovering this afternoon, Liberals debate. If not a single person is allowed to speak against a motion, it's not a debate, it's a travesty. The problem is that that actually happens. It did happen all too recently. People putting in cards to speak against a motion, but not a single one being called to speak. And that's actually the reason why this motion is here today. Now, there may be good reasons, good arguments against a motion or for amending the motion, but you will never know them if conference never hears them. And that should never happen at a Liberal Democrat conference. And this motion can ensure that it will never happen in future, because the role of the session chair should be to ensure a good debate, not to prevent it. If we pass this motion, and this is the key point, at least one person will always be allowed to speak against any motion or amendment, and they'll be called to speak straight after the proposers, so there's no danger of their being squeezed out because the debate runs out of time or perhaps because of technical problems. Now, Prue made point, she's not the only one. Of course, there may be no cards to speak against a motion or an amendment. The motion is very clear on this. If nobody wants to speak against, nobody speaks against. That is not a problem. We've also been told that the proposal is too complicated or confusing, but the existing standing order wording is actually totally ambiguous. This motion provides clarity. It ensures that speakers on one side of the debate aren't crowded out by a huge number of cards being submitted on the other side. But it also ensures that at the end of the debate, we're told how many cards were submitted on each side. I concede that challenges arising from this have been raised. I do concede that point. Now, we've been told that if there's a great majority of speakers submitting cards to speak for a motion or an amendment, we shouldn't be wasting our time listening to more than a very few speakers against. In that point, we might as well not bother to hold a debate at all. The point of debates is to test ideas, especially, even if they're popular ones, especially if they're popular. We may be in a meeting where most of us think something's a great idea until somebody, just one person, sticks their hand up and says, hold on, we may have a problem here, and that can turn the discussion around. Challenging ideas is what Liberals do. We use reason and evidence. We recognize that we're not always right, that what seems like a good idea in principle may not be so great in practice. We argue our case, we listen to opposing arguments, and sometimes we change our minds. We speak, we persuade, we listen, we learn, and then we vote. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much, Toby. So we now move to the vote on the standing order amendment. We've opened it up online already for those who are online. So can I please see all of those in favour of the standing order amendment? Thank you very much. Can I now see all those against the standing order amendment? Thank you very much. I'll just check the online voting. Just while we're waiting for the final votes to trickle in, it's worth noting and apologising to the many people, actually, who put in cards who I was not able to call. I did not have a single card in favour, which is why the balance of the debate was the way that it was. So I just want to make that clear from the chair, just in case. Thank you, conference. The votes online marry with the votes in the hall. That is clearly defeated. I'd like to thank my aide, Kath Pinnock, and Eleanor Kelly in the hall, and I'll now hand over to John Ball, who will be chairing the next debate, I think.
Good evening, Conference, and welcome to the last item of today's business, F35, a brief debate on the membership subscriptions and federal levy. The motion starts on page 92 of the agenda. There's one amendment which starts on page 12 of today's Conference Daily, and all this information is also available in the Conference app and online via the agenda link on the Conference Live page. Joe Norris and Alison Rouse, please stand by. And I now call Mike Cox, the party treasurer, to move both the motion and the amendment.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Conference. I'd like to move the amendment F35, clearly a very fascinating motion, and I think the people leaving are just probably so excited they're going to the toilet. So basically, the motion involves continuing to freeze the minimum subscription rates, membership rates, freezing those entitled to state benefits, and recommending that we drop the recommended membership rate because we no longer use it. This motion is so exciting that I'm having to amend it myself. So we're replacing 5 with the following: that the federal levy shall be reduced from 55% to 50%, and adding a 6th paragraph, which is that Conference notes that the federal and state parties have committed to implement the financial mechanisms that uphold the principles of federalism, removing any negative financial impact on either federal or state parties resulting from this amendment. This motion, as amended, is supported by the Federal Board and the state parties. The motion restores the levy balance between the federal and state parties as it was before, and it will also negate any immediate financial impacts that may arise. The amended motion has been very carefully negotiated, and so I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Will Jeremy Hargreaves please stand by? And I now call Joe Norris from Kettering and Wellingborough, who is the chair of English Young Liberals and is speaking for Amendment 1.
Thank you. This is my first speech to conference, and it's great to see how many of you are here today. First of all, I'd just like to give a really big thank you to Alison Rouse, chair of the party in England. She's very welcoming, a great mentor to me personally, and all round brilliant. As the chair of English Young Liberals, I am involved in the English party. I get to sit on the English Council Executive, and I have seen the great plans we have for the money we will receive if you vote in favour of Amendment 1, which reduces the federal levy down 5% to 50%. As a young Liberal, I know that, this money being in England's hands will be able to do great things for young people in the party. Young Liberals will be able to get a slightly higher grant to help with the rising cost of living and the associated rising cost that we do to hold events, print literature, and put on our conferences which engage young members and give them a chance to speak. We are also looking into, is my position as the representative from the Young Liberals, into launching an internship programme which will be giving targeted support to each regions and the vital work they do, and will give opportunities to young people in the party to professionally develop. Overall, please do vote for this motion. It's really good and will do a lot of brilliant targeted work in England, both for the regions and for young people. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Will Alison Rouse please stand by? I now call Jeremy Hargreaves, who's the Vice Chair of Federal Board, who's speaking for the motion as a whole.
Conference, despite the late hour, this motion is actually important. It deals with the financial flows around our party, which make many of the important things we've just heard about and other things happen. So it is important, despite the late hour, and not totally unanimous attendance by conference attendees at this hour. It has been carefully discussed and agreed between all the relevant parties, particularly the Federal Party and the State Party, and after much discussion and really in-depth and valuable discussion by people who I pay tribute to for their hard work, they have agreed on the version in the amendment. I know you're like me. When everyone starts agreeing, your liberal toes start itching and you get nervous and think, you know, what they're covering up, what's going on here, there must be some, you know, hitch in it somewhere. Conference, there isn't. The people involved in this have agreed the amendment here. Please support the amendment and vote for the amendment and the motion.
Thank you, Jeremy. Will Mark Pack please stand by to summate? And I now call Alison Rouse, who is the Chair of the Lib Dems in England, who is submitting for Amendment 1.
Well, hi there, Conference. It is also my first time speaking. I'm not sure how I've managed to get to this elevated status before doing this, and genuinely was bricking myself, so please be gentle. Also, thank you to Jo for that very sweet compliment. That was really nice. She caught me off guard. So, hello, Conference. I just think this is really important because this is an example of us all working together. You know, the states have negotiated, we've worked together, the Federal Party, etc. And I think what's important in the amendment is that it states that we will take care of each other. Because what it says is, we will commit to financial mechanisms that will ensure that nobody will suffer a fiscal detriment as a result of this amendment. So, the states have a problem, Federal looks after us. Federal has a problem, we look after them. All rise together or not at all, as my old mentor Bob Pierce used to say. So, you know, that's us working together to get stuff done, and I'm probably going to name drop the word Thornhill in there at this point, because I think I have to. One of the things I wanted to say, and obviously I'm here as the English Party Chair because I was part of the negotiating team. Thank you to my fellow state representatives as well. One of the things I wanted to do was I had some feedback from some members, so I thought I might take a little opportunity to explain what this means, because some people came up to me and said that, frankly, they didn't have any idea. The English Party's only income comes from membership fees, from the things you pay. We then, currently, pay 55% of that income to the Federal Party. On top of that, currently, we also pay a service level agreement of £4.50 per every one of you. That's services we rely on the HQ for. Basically, they're the supplier, we're the client. You know, and this way we're working together and we rely on those services. Things like compliance that keep us all out of trouble, yes? Now, what are the benefits? What does it mean? It's more accountability. One of the English Party's goals going into these negotiations was that we needed to reinstate the regional rebate because there's been cuts last year. It's not fair to ask all of you local parties and members and regions to go into building for a general election after cuts. We needed to give you something back. So what this does is this allows the English Party to return the regional rebate to 15%, where it should be. It also allows us to take care of our Investing in Regions project, which some of you might have heard of. I know Joe has, because he mentioned it. But it's basically where we give money to regions as a grant, because we thought, what's the most direct way we can help? How about giving you some money? The only condition is you have to spend it on staffing. And then we get out of the way and let you do what you know how to do best. And we measure it. And results have shown, particularly from the local elections, from the local elections, that this was impactful. So, what I would ask is that you back the amendment and you back the motion. And I want to say thank you to state colleagues and Mike and Mark and federal colleagues for making this possible, because we do all rise together or not at all, and that's the way we're going to win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. And finally, that's fine. Finally, I call Mark Pack, our party president, who will summate for the motion as a whole.
This feels like one of the easier speaking gigs at conference. I hope, by the way, though, that everyone noticed Jeremy was wearing a 50 badge earlier. I will let you decide whether he was wearing that to mark celebrating the idea of the federal levy being set at 50%, or because it's his 50th birthday, or because it's his 50th conference. But I have no such badge. But I will simply just say very briefly, as you've heard from the other speakers, there's been a very carefully, and one might say almost tortuous process, but it's tortuous in the good sense of people taking time from all different parts of the party to talk and negotiate together to work out a financial settlement that will work for all parts of the party. And that's what the motion with the amendment will give us. So I'd really encourage you to vote for the amendment and vote for the motion, and then enjoy all the fringe meetings to come that may just have a slightly higher attendance than this debate. But thank you for your interest and attention in what is, as Jeremy said, an important issue. And please do vote for the amendment and the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Now, I received no cards against either the motion or the amendment, which explains the slightly one-sided nature of this debate. We now move to a series of 2 votes which you can take part in here or online. First, we'll vote on Amendment 1, which is already open online. So can I see those in the hall who are in favour of Amendment 1? Great, thank you. And can I see those against Amendment 1? Somebody thought about it but changed their mind. So I think that in the hall is NEMCON, but we'll wait a little longer for online. Yeah, and it's NEMCON online as well. So that is very, very clearly passed. And now we're going to, so let me just, so now we'll see the votes in the hall for the motion as a whole as amended by Amendment 1. So I can see those in favour. Great, thank you. And can I see those against? Okay, great, thank you. So we're just going to make sure that's live to the people at home. Yeah, sorry about the slight delay. While we're waiting for the online results, I'll just mention that there are opportunities to submit cards with a good chance of being called for the emergency motion session tomorrow morning, F36, Protecting the European Convention on Human Rights, at 9 a.m. Okay, so not quite NEMCON, but it's very overwhelmingly carried in both the hall and online. So thank you very much. Yes, thank you to the very well-informed speakers in our debate. And I'd also like to thank my aide here, Alison Jenner, and my aide in the hall, Duncan Brack. And that is the end of today's session. So I look forward to seeing you all in the Glee Club later.